On the 4-year anniversary of September 11, 2005, History Channel debuted a documentary called Grounded on 9/11 about the stories of air traffic controllers in the US and Canada who were able to successfully ground all commercial air traffic, thousands of airplanes right within hours after the 9/11 attacks. Although the commission report had been released over a year prior to History Channel's broadcast, the general public was already familiar with the official narrative set in place days, if not weeks after the attacks, which concluded that there was only 19 hijackers throughout the 4 doomed hijacked planes involved in the original conspiracy, excluding Zacharias Moussaoui, who had already been detained previously in Minnesota for immigration naturalization charges. However, Grounded on 9/11 covered some events completely contrary to the official story.
By 9:03 on Tuesday morning, September 11th, hijackers had flown 2 airliners into 2 of the tallest buildings in the world. Once United Airlines realizes the second plane is one of theirs, company dispatchers contact hundreds in their remaining fleet.
My attention was strictly on what's the security status of all the aircraft. So we instituted a procedure, which we still have today, for positive contact. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the dispatchers were talking to the crews to ascertain the cockpit was still secure, so we knew that we were in command of every airplane.
At Newark Airport, the pilot of United Flight 23 wasn't taking any chances. After speaking to company dispatchers, he keeps his transcontinental flight scheduled for LA on the ground. When the plane returns to the gate, it's reported that several unruly, allegedly Middle Eastern men rush from the plane, leaving their luggage behind. Inside the bags, officials find Al-Qaeda instruction sheets, but false IDs prevent investigators from ever locating the bag's true owners.
I maintain to this day that based on my personal belief and based on the events of that morning, the decision to halt airplanes in all likelihood probably precluded other attacks.
For a cable network such as History Channel, infamous for suggesting a consortium of mysteries and outright conspiracy theories on many other subjects, and at the same time also known for defending official narratives and outright war propaganda, particularly when it comes to 9/11, usually. But here we have an anomaly as what the narrator suggested occurring at Newark Airport about United Flight 23 with this 5th hijacking attempt by several Middle Eastern men fleeing and leaving false identities in their baggage. There's a tremendous error with this claim on Grounded on 9/11, as this incident with Flight 23 did not occur at Newark Airport, as where United Flight 93 departs and gets eventually hijacked. This story with Flight 23 happens at John F. Kennedy International Airport. But about 3 years later, the former Alex Jones InfoWars host and filmmaker of the infamous Loose Change saga, Jason Burmas produced his 4th and most controversial film, Fabled Enemies, which was his first for finally recognizing the prominent cover-up of Israeli operatives linked to 9/11, but it also briefly covered Flight 23 at JFK Airport, accompanied with that portion of History Channel's Grounded on 9/11.
Later in the day, weapons are found planted on several other planes. A U.S. official says of the hijackings, these look like inside jobs. Sources tell Time that U.S. officials are investigating whether the hijackers had accomplices deep inside the airport's secure areas. And then there's the story of Flight 23.
Provided with no date or time, the report which Burmas also accompanies his claim with is a briefly edited one from NBC's Today Show with Matt Lauer and an appearance by a local New York newscaster, Tim Minton, on September 13, 2001, just 2 days after the attacks. Rather than show Fabled Enemies' edited version, this is the complete interview entailed.
As bad as things were on Tuesday, there is a possibility that they could have been even worse. Tim Minton of our flagship station, WNBC-TV here in New York, has some disturbing information. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. It was about the time that the first attacks on the World Trade Center were starting, and at JFK Airport, which has not previously been connected to any of the outgoing flights, just before 9 o'clock, United Flight 23, scheduled to depart for Los Angeles, was boarding. There was some kind of an altercation involving 3 men described by a Port Authority of New York and New Jersey police source as Middle Eastern in appearance. Somehow, the source will not reveal the exact details. They attracted the suspicions of the gate staff boarding that flight. The staff had some kind of a verbal exchange and demanded that these 3 men leave the aircraft. The men...
They had already gotten on the plane.
They're on the plane. It's very close to departure. The scheduled departure time was 9 o'clock. As you and the viewers know at this point, the first attack on the World Trade Center was just 15 minutes before. So as they're boarding the flight, the attack is either about to happen or has just happened, but nobody knows about it. And certainly nobody knows that airplanes are involved. So what happens then is they're asked to leave the aircraft. They refuse to get off. The airline, following its normal procedures, according to this police source, calls the police, which immediately dispatch an emergency service team. So now you have a squad of heavily armed officers that are coming toward the airplane. And when they get there, the men have vanished. The gate staff can't find them. And clearly what the employees were trying to do was get them off the plane. So the fact that they had slipped away may not be as big a surprise.
A couple of the disturbing facts here. One, this is a flight from JFK to Los Angeles, so it matches with the type of flights, the transcontinental flights that were hijacked in the other 4 instances. Another disturbing fact, if indeed there was an altercation and these men felt they had a case to make and were being treated unfairly, you can't imagine they would have disappeared from the airport. They would have stayed around and pled their case with the police.
And there are 2 other disturbing things in addition to that. The first is, you know from, and viewers would know from their experience traveling, it is extraordinarily unusual to have an airline, after it has boarded passengers, be so suspicious that it's going to ask these customers to get off the airplane. That said, it would be equally unusual, if you will, for passengers in that situation not to at least get up, go to the gate, have the conversation that you're describing. To sit in your seat, to be so determined, unusual.
You reported this story on WNBC TV here in New York, and I understand were contacted after the airing of that story.
We got a phone call from a law enforcement officer who was on vacation, was in the United Airlines terminal at the time. He said at the time he didn't add it all up, but seeing the report and, of course, having seen what happened in New York and elsewhere afterwards, he decided at that point he needed to contact his supervisors. Essentially what he saw was, he's in the United terminal. It's just after 9 o'clock. The attacks have happened. The television set in the bar in the terminal is on. As you can imagine, people about to fly, anybody indeed, would have been transfixed by those events. So now NBC and others are reporting the second attack just after 9 o'clock. He says the entire terminal was riveted to these television sets at the bar in one corner, except 2 men who were sitting off to the side, as he described it on the phone last night, appearing to him, veteran police officer, as being way too cool. So he walked over out of curiosity. He says he heard them speaking a language he could not identify. He doesn't know what the language was, but it wasn't English. And he says as he approached, they looked over, they saw him coming over. He says he then saw Port Authority police who were perhaps searching. In any event, they were running. He said he got close enough to hear that the men were talking in raised tones. He described it as a stern conversation, the way you might have, he said, with your wife if you were angry but you didn't want people around to hear that you were having a fight with your wife. He said as soon as he approached, they walked out of the terminal, and he looked over. He described them as Middle Eastern in both appearance and dress. Not sure what that means, but that was his description. He said when they left the terminal through the glass doors, he saw them meet a 3rd man, and they then left. He didn't see how. Now, same 3 men? Who knows? But it was the same terminal, clearly at the same time, because he said the second attack had just happened on the television set, and he was walking over from that. It's certainly, at the very least, unsettling. The Port Authority police source said it's been referred to the FBI.
I mean, obviously, that you have to stop and think for a second here. Obviously, there's a lot of coincidental information here, and there's also a chance that people are being paranoid in the wake of these attacks. But at the very least, there are some disturbing similarities.
You can't jump to conclusions. But what's real is 3 men were asked to leave the airplane, and they refused, then vanished.
Much more significant details here than what Jason Burmis edited. But again, 3 years later on, now coming on the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, ABC WJLA News 7 in Washington, D.C. on September 19, 2011, reported on the mystery of Flight 23 likely being the only time after that this covered-up, aborted hijacked flight was brought up on any syndicated news, but accompanied with plugging a new book at the time, Touching History, the untold story of the drama that unfolded in the skies over America on 9/11, interviewing the author, Lynn Spencer, and surprisingly, the co-pilot of Flight 23.
Their faces and their shameful deeds have been etched into our nation's collective conscience. But ABC 7 News has learned that the 19 men who used planes as missiles may not have been the only terrorists aboard commercial flights on that dark day in September. It's information the FBI will not confirm. You won't find it in the 9/11 Commission report. But a brigadier general and a former pilot are talking.
I don't think many people know about those men on board United 23 or about the items that were found.
And they went running off the airplane, never to be seen again. So, who knows?
On September 11th, Brigadier General Carol Timmons of the Delaware Air National Guard was co-piloting United Flight 23, heading from JFK to Los Angeles. But while in line to take off, air traffic controllers closed the airport and she received a dire message.
Hijackings. We've had hijackings. Secure the cockpit. Either land or get back to the terminal. So as we turn to taxi back, we can see the towers on fire. I can close my eyes and see it today. So it was horrendous. It's horrendous.
To add to her angst, she received a chilling call.
In the meantime, as we're taxiing back, the flight attendant says, "Hey, I've got some very agitated men sitting in first class. They're very unhappy. Why aren't we taking off? Why aren't we taking off?"
But once at the gate, the men disappeared into the sea of people evacuating JFK.
There's the generally held belief that there were other planes out there.
Former commercial pilot Lynn Spencer wrote Touching History, a minute-by-minute account of the air drama that unfolded on 9/11. She says high-ranking FAA officials and airport managers have confirmed to her that during a search of United Flight 23, box cutters and al-Qaeda documents were discovered in unclaimed bags.
It was believed by those who searched the plane and found these items that they were indeed hijackers on that flight.
Spencer says federal officials believe not just one, but several additional planes were carrying terrorists on September 11th. But since the FAA shut down U.S. airspace, those twisted minds never hit their targets.
I think we are all aware of how horrible September 11th was. Can we really imagine if another 8, 9, 10 planes had also been successful?
In contrast to Fabled Enemies, this local news investigative piece seems to underline the seriousness with this incident of Flight 23 being omitted from the 9/11 Commission report. Unlike Jason Burmis, which only touched on weapons and suspicious items being found at airports, as well as only alleging the hijackers had accomplices working for the airports, which we will touch back on much further ahead in this film, as there's more to the story with History Channel's Grounded on 9/11. But does Lynn Spencer's claim have some merit that there could have been up to 10 more hijacked planes on 9/11? Were the 3 fleeing Middle Eastern suspects that the Flight 23 co-pilot Carol Timmons encountered on the plane ever seen again? Aside for JFK and other airports, what about the 3 airports where all 4 official hijacked American and United Airline flights departed from? Boston, Logan, Dulles, and Newark. Could there have been more targeted flights intended on 9/11? The answer to some of those questions is a surprising yes. But before we get to that, there are a few other popularly held beliefs from both conspiracy theorists and official defenders that we need to address first as possible alternatives and answers in order to make such claims comprehensive, given how many years now that it's been since, and that most only remember the day of 9/11, rather than what instantly followed that week. And if you think it's a lost cause or misleading to focus on anomalies regarding early reports about any of the alleged hijackers, flights, and airports, due to preconceived outlandish myths, including NORAD being ordered to stand down, or that there had been a sudden change in response protocol, ultimately making NORAD unable to intercept any of the 4 hijacked flights on 9/11, by the end of this film, you are going to discover that neither claims or accusations attributed to NORAD, such as even wargame exercises, did not matter. Because the overall narrative challenge and question that should be asked by both 9/11 truthers and official story defenders is, was BOJINKA 9/11? As I've already demonstrated in previous films, such as An Inconvenient 9/11 Truth Part 2, and in recent again, with World Trade Center bombing of 1993, Hidden Path to 9/11, Crimes, Cover-Ups, and Missing Links, that after the 1993 bombing, when fugitive Ramzi Youssef and other conspirators, including his uncle, alleged future 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, fled from the Philippines after Youssef's apartment caught on fire while making bombs, where Youssef then sent his friend Abdul Hakim Murad to retrieve his laptop but was captured by Philippines authorities, where subsequently terrorist plans were discovered in the laptop with the code name BOJINKA. As you may recall what the colonel of the Philippines National Police, Rudolfo aka Boogie Mendoza, said from his interrogation of Murad that he believed that the later phase of the BOJINKA plans was the blueprint of 9/11. Where U.S. officials have only dared to say that 9/11 was only inspired by the BOJINKA plot, and that in fact it would have been too large of a scale of an operation to pull off, this being later backed up by statements with KSM complying that the operation could only handle 4 planes and the absence of explosives. This all in happenstance to yet having not been able to find direct evidence of him working under the behest of Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda network ordering the attacks, as the FBI never had OBL wanted for 9/11, only terrorist attacks committed prior around the world, specifically USS Cole and East Africa embassy bombings. But there's a few other myths we need to address here that have been promoted not only by the fringes of the right-wing conspiracy theorists, but also on the left of mainstream media. One of the other myths that we must dispel, which I've already done so in my previous film, 6 on 77, the Dulles Airport 9/11 cover-up, is that the authorities had all 19 hijacker names and identities the following day after 9/11, which is still a commonly held belief in the 9/11 truth movement. But this is simply not the case. As you may recall, John Ashcroft in his first press conference after 9/11, at around 3:45 p.m., he had no names or precise number of hijackers, only that there was a ratio between 3 to 6 hijackers on a plane.
The 4 planes were hijacked by between 3 and 6 individuals per plane.
But following this, Robert Mueller also spoke as to giving a summary of how federal agents were carrying out the nationwide dragnet pertaining to what details they had to them based off the flight manifest.
In the last 24 hours, we have been addressing 2 objectives. The first objective is to determine, identify the hijackers on each of the planes. Having identified the hijackers on each of the planes, we then have sought to identify any of their associates remaining in the United States. Our first effort is to identify any associates in the United States who might be related to the hijackers and to remove those associates, investigate, and arrest, given the evidence, those individuals, and to remove any threat to the air system in the future. That is our first objective. The second objective is to gather any and all evidence we have as to whom assisted the hijackers, and not only in this country but also overseas. We also have identified through a number of leads, principally at the cities of origin, a number of individuals whom we believe may have had something to do with the hijackings, and we are pursuing those leads aggressively.
Aside the signs of anomalies with 3 to 6 hijackers and using the flight manifest as an evidentiary base rather than confirmation, being that eventually, or as the story goes, there is supposed to be 4 to 5 hijackers who had simply boarded using their real identities and easily found on the manifest, with their names, passenger, and seat numbers, but separate from what's potentially covered up about the official hijackers boarding or weapons used on the planes. It's obvious federal authorities were worried that the 9/11 hijackers had associates still out there who may have posed a future threat. And just about an hour later, Norman Mineta held a press conference at the Department of Transportation.
Now, effective immediately, I have directed the Federal Aviation Administration to reopen on a limited basis the nation's commercial airspace to allow flights and passengers who were diverted yesterday to be able to continue on to their original destinations. Only passengers on the original flights will be allowed to reboard under strict security, and only after airports and airlines have implemented strict screening measures. I have also directed that the FAA temporarily extend the ground stop order that was imposed yesterday while additional security measures are being completed and we continue to assess any potential threats.
But there's a particular detail about the BOJINKA plan that needs to be underlined as likely being an additional reason for such a warning sign for other suspects other than what we already know with Flight 23 at the moment. Because although there being different versions and dates for the BOJINKA plot, it's also known to be the 48 hours of terror, indicating that it would be 2 days worth of attacks. And as all U.S. airports remain closed for well over 24 hours since the attacks with the FAA's no-fly ban, the U.S. was basically shut down for 2 entire days, as the rumor was that airports were supposed to be open sometime on September 12th, 9/12. And while most were still in shock, grieving and angry for the past 2 days, safe at their homes, thousands of travelers didn't have that luxury, as they in fact had been stuck for nearly 2 days outside U.S. airports in makeshift shelters, desperately wanting to get back home safely or to their final destination, while all inbound coming flights that were supposed to arrive in the U.S. were diverted to Canada and other neighboring territories where those travelers also suffered similar consequences. Which brings us to one of the bigger myths that needs to be addressed before we roll into September 13th. It's the claim infamously promoted by Michael Moore and embraced by many in the 9/11 truth movement, in his 2004 movie Fahrenheit 9/11, that while all commercial civil aviation was grounded, the entire bin Laden family that resided in the U.S. was able to fly out of the country the next day. Although the 9/11 Commission report states they found no evidence of political intervention, that anyone in the White House above the levels of National Security Council participated in any decision on the departure of Saudi nationals. The President and Vice President told us that they were not aware of the issue at all until it surfaced much later in the media. This here is a photo taken from September 13th with Bandar Bush bin Sultan, President Bush, Cheney, and Condoleezza Rice, and Bandar's aide Rehab Massoud on the White House balcony, where Bandar is speaking in regards to getting the bin Laden family out of the U.S. safely, rather than what some have tried to suggest that it's them having a congratulatory cigar. No evidence that any flights of Saudi nationals, domestic or international, took place before the reopening of national airspace on the morning of September 13, 2001. But as airspace reopened, 9 chartered flights with 160 people, mostly Saudi nationals, departed from the United States between September 14th and 24th. Much of this has been covered on other articles charting what exact flights were shuttled before departing the continental U.S. But there's a good reason for these bin Laden family delays, still even after airports become reopened on the 13th, which we are about to go into next. Even though the following day, 9/12, most airline security experts were already suggesting quick fixes were not going to secure or resolve any potential follow-up hijacking attempts.
We have a very high security standard here. We consider ourselves as secure, if not more secure, than any other airport in the United States.
But numerous government reports over the last decade have found significant security lapses at many of the nation's major airports.
U.S. airports have a terrible security problem, and just asking Grandma if she's packed her own bag isn't going to fix that problem. It's more than just the passenger checkpoint. It's the whole perimeter of the airport and all the people that go on and off. And the FAA, no matter what they tell you, has done a terrible job at that.
Aviation experts say it is likely the air transportation system in America will be changed forever.
This became more cautioned as we continued the following day, early on September 13th, 9/13. Although a good portion of the news did cover the ongoing 9/11 investigations and dragnet at airports, at around 6:06 a.m. 9/13, CNN first reports New York airports are starting to reopen.
Interrupt. This is Vince Giulini in Atlanta at our studios. We do want to pass this along and get back to you that we understand that after the FAA shutdown of a couple of days ago, the airports are opening around New York. Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Newark open on a limited basis for travel.
It's just a few seconds ago you reported that all 3 New York airports are reopening. We want to show you a live picture of LaGuardia International Airport right now, where people are already beginning to line up.
With WABC, Lisa Quintana is at LaGuardia Airport, where some service is now resuming. Lisa, is it still on a limited basis?
Oh, not even that. As of yet, there has been no air activity. Now, the airport here, LaGuardia, did reopen at 6 o'clock in the morning. Behind me, you'll see airport employees, you'll see airport passengers back there. But if we...
Hours before John Ashcroft makes his second 9/11 investigation press conference, he appears on ABC's Good Morning America with Diane Sawyer and Charles Gibson, giving slight early clues on the progress of the FBI dragnet.
Well, I can just tell you that we have ongoing activities literally not only across America, but in every office of the FBI, and we have offices around the world, that our leads are, we believe, productive leads, that we're working on those, that the individuals involved were trained as pilots, that some of them were trained in the United States of America. They operated with technical proficiency to target and to land an aircraft of that size with the deadly accuracy of these acts of war was something that obviously resulted from a complex organization with significant ground support, and which was the result of very, very substantial training.
And you talked about 4 cells of terrorists with up to different, I believe you said there were up to 50 people could have been involved. So was there some sort of coordinating structure, do you suspect, of these different cells of terrorists?
Well, we know that there were 4 episodes, and we know that the individuals who committed the crimes perished in the criminal act of war. I don't want to frame this as merely a criminal act. This is an act of war against the United States. Sure. And we know that there had to be ground support and coordination. We are not prepared to say how much ground support, how much coordination, and whether or not there is a sort of cellular breakdown and what that would be if there is a cellular breakdown.
We are now joined by Mary Schiavo, who is the former Department of Transportation Inspector General. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
I wanted to get your quick reaction to some of the new guidelines that are going to go into effect at airports across the nation. I am going to quickly recap some of these new regulations. Among them, no curbside check-in. Only ticketed passengers will be allowed through security. No knives of any kind can be brought on board, and higher standards for security personnel, and more federal marshals in place at larger airports. Will any of this prevent the kind of attack that the United States has just endured?
No, this is a piecemeal response, and I think it really gives away how shell-shocked the FAA is. Many of these recommendations, for example, the tighter and higher standards for security personnel, those have been recommendations for almost a decade, and now we're seeing them in the wake of this terrible terrorist attack on domestic aviation. We have had sky marshals, by the way. We have very few numbers, but increasing that is definitely an improvement. But what we need is coordinated law enforcement to run our aviation security at our nationwide airports in a coordinated manner, not a civilian FAA piecing it together with local authorities across the country. And this has pointed up that great shortcoming.
All right, well, what do you mean by that? That you'd have law enforcement agents stationed at every security zone in an airport? They would be the ones overseeing the checking in of luggage and the handling of hand baggage as you head to your airport gate?
No, actually, it's more pervasive than that. It stems from the very top. Right now, our overall coordination of airport security and our policies and procedures are set by the civilian Federal Aviation Administration, which has been highly criticized for well over a decade at being unable to perform this function. The law enforcement function overall, setting the policies, running the programs, telling our airports, our almost 400 passenger service airports, how to do this in other countries is run by law enforcement, not by the civilian FAA. And what we need is a national coordinated federal law enforcement oversight of airports, because we are only as safe as our weakest link. The other problem is, of course, that we now know that at least at one airport they had ramp access. which is not surprising with a coordinated attack this big and for as easy it is to get a job at an airport. I mean, many of the jobs are minimum wage, low or no screening. We have had convictions for actually lying about security agencies or companies actually doing the background checks. That has even been the subject of a criminal case in this country. So now we know that the system is compromised from within as well, and this is a total failure of the system, saying, oh, well, okay, some screeners missed it, or some screeners, weren't even required to pick it up. We have something far more serious going on than that when we find out that they have ramp passes and literally could have compromised the entire system.
What Mary Scavo implicates out of here is very crucial, and the airport that she's referring to with ramp passes being found has to do with the rental car found at Boston Logan Airport, allegedly having been rented by a Mohammed Atta. But we will address Boston Logan Airport on 9/11 much later. Since 2 of the hijacked flights departed out of there, the investigation seemed to have had more attention there, as Logan had postponed reopening much later than most airports who are still attempting to open at this point.
Bryant, some significant details are coming out now from federal investigators about the aftermath of this terrorist attack. And let me give you the headlines and then go through what detail I can share with you, which essentially is that they don't have any arrests yet. They still have no suspects in custody. They say that they believe that the people who carried out these attacks were in fact assisted and sheltered by people in the United States, but the biggest question obviously is, are those people still here, and are they planning any additional attacks? Quite frankly, the authorities said this morning they don't know. They say that they are investigating the possibility, and we have to underline here possibility, that some other hijackings may have been aborted on Tuesday, that some aircraft in fact may have been targeted, but that those aircraft were taken to the ground after word was quickly spread through the system that, in fact, hijackings and crashes had occurred. They say they are dealing with some anecdotal evidence that suggests that, but they say they have no hard evidence that that is the case. And finally, the question as to how many people have been detained apparently has been overblown, too. The number apparently, Bryant, is, quote, very small, and it's highly unlikely that any of these people are going to be traced directly back to the attacks. This is, however, a system that we're going to see unfold today, which is to say that I think we'll see more people detained today. I do not, however, get any impression that they expect any arrest today, Brian.
And again, you say that they're saying that a number of people assisted and sheltered those individuals. Do we have a number involved there, and whether or not those people were complicit in the attacks?
The best that I can report at this time on that is to knock down other reporting, and not knock down, but try to clarify, other reporting, which have placed that number at 10. I can't find any substance for the number 10.
As I've already demonstrated before on my film 6 on 77, the Dulles Airport 9/11 cover-up, that at 10:19 a.m., Ashcroft was asked by NBC's Matt Lauer if authorities had identified all hijackers that were involved.
Have you identified all the people you think who were actually on the plane involved in these plots?
Well, we do know the manifests for the planes. So we do know that we believe there were between 3 to 6 hijack involved perpetrators. Those obviously have some parameters. 3 to 6 is not exactly an exact number.
Originally it stops here, but this is what he also said.
We don't want to scare people, Attorney General Ashcroft, but wouldn't it be safe to assume that there may have been others, perhaps even sitting on planes that never took off because of the ground hold or that were delayed, that there could be other people at large who were a part of this plot?
Well, that's one of the reasons that we want to emphasize prevention in what we do, as well as detection and understanding of what the facts were in regard to these acts of war against the United States. That's the reason that the Justice Department, together with the Treasury, are going to be devoting hundreds of marshals, customs agents, Immigration and Naturalization Service, Border Patrol type people to participate in the startup of air travel service, and to deploy these individuals in addition to the kinds of search and the more stringent requirements related to passengers on air service.
What's the difference going to be for traveling passengers when they try to board a plane, when they arrive at an airport? What do you want to see happen?
Well, there are a whole range of differences relating to the security of the airport property itself, relating to the procedures regarding airport employees, regarding the kinds of luggage that will be allowed on airplanes, regarding the existence of U.S. Marshals, other law enforcement officials in other settings to promote the security of the airplanes. The airplanes are undergoing very thorough searches since having ceased operations 2 days ago. So there's a whole range of undertakings designed to assure the public of the fact that the airlines are safe.
Just to paraphrase, what you're saying is we've now reached a point in this country based on this attack where we're going to be flying along with plainclothes armed guards on a lot of flights.
It's our intention to do what is necessary to make planes safe and to provide a reasonable understanding in the public that our planes are safe and that America is back to business.
And just a few minutes later, Secretary of Transportation Norman Mineta begins his second press conference after 9/11, announcing that airports could be reopened after lockdown following the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon, outlining security requirements to be implemented, followed up with his remarks and answering questions to journalists.
Now I am pleased to announce some good news for travelers, for our economy, and for the restoration of America's freedom of mobility. Effective 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today, our national airspace system will reopen to commercial aviation. I must caution everyone that a system as diverse and complex as ours cannot be brought up instantly. And so we will be reopening airports and airlines will be resuming their flights as they meet the new security measures that we are now imposing. And in these extraordinary times, we will be vigilant. Therefore, I have ordered a variety of security measures to be instituted at our nation's airports upon reopening to improve the security of our national aviation system. From this day forward, we are operating with tightened security. In the weeks and months ahead, we will do all that we can to ensure that the safety of the American aviation system is in place.
Mr. Secretary, some safety experts are saying that the United States is opening their airports too quickly, that some of the security measures are a quick fix and low-level security, and that we should be really looking at a long-term possibility of even federalizing security, arming pilots, training flight attendants with some kind of anti-terrorist combat. Is there any thoughts or any feelings, or have there been discussions on adding more security into the airlines and airports?
Well, I think the part of the question, the implication is the short-term, long-term. What we are trying to do right now is restore to normalcy as well as we can the ability to travel. The President had indicated on Tuesday that he wanted to return life in the United States as fast to what we knew before 8:50 a.m. on Tuesday. And so what we are trying to do is to get back into normalcy by allowing commercial airline travel. Yesterday we said we would allow those continuation flights or flights that were diverted to continue on to their final location. So we're trying to do things on a two-phase basis. If I were to characterize it, one to try to get up as soon as we can, and then the other to deal with some of these other issues on a longer-term basis.
The next question on hindsight towards Mineta becomes rather rewarding, given the verified information of when the FAA decided to place the no-fly ban, which prevented additional flights being targeted for hijackings, as we currently know with the example of Flight 23 at JFK Airport.
Let me take
Secretary, yes, as you receive reports on what happened Tuesday, is Is there anything that you've seen that you wish the people of this department had done differently?
Oh, you know, I suppose those kinds of what ifs and could haves and should haves, I really don't want to get into that. We've got 47,000 employees in the FAA who on Tuesday, in terms of especially the air traffic control element of it, just performed superbly. You know, when that first plane went down at 8:50, and then 17 minutes later the second one went, and then 23 minutes later the third one we lost. One is an accident, two is a trend, three is a program. And when that third airplane went down is when I said to the FAA, shut it down. Bring every airplane in the air to the ground. And at that point we had over 2,100 airplanes in the air. And in less than 2 hours, we brought every one of those airplanes. The air traffic control system, air traffic controllers, brought those airplanes down safely in some airport. And so to me, are there things that could have been done differently? Sure, I suppose. There are things I wish I had done differently on Tuesday maybe, or Monday, or last month. Those I'd rather not get into.
It's one thing to make an accusation about Dick Cheney having changed protocols to NORAD, being an insider on the 9/11 operation, having made a stand-down order, but this film eliminates that accusation since the attacks were operationally launched at airports, where neither of these two administration officials in the emergency POC bunker had any effort or control to that. Basically, in what we know so far with the fifth plane at JFK Airport, Flight 23, and the potential for other targeted flights, this reaction revelation from Mineta should be an indicator in relief that the FAA superseded him, taking the proper action of grounding all aviation after the second plane struck the World Trade Center, rather than incompetently deciding so after the third plane struck the Pentagon. But now forward ahead, as airports have officially reopened.
We have just gotten information that LaGuardia Airport, which is one of the three airports that has just opened, is now being evacuated. We have no idea what that means, and as soon as we get more information on that, we'll bring it to you. Of course, you heard Transportation Secretary Mineta talking about the new security guidelines that will be in place in airports across the nation.
Let's take a look at airports around the country. LaGuardia was one of the first ones to open. We've been hearing different reports that it was open, then it wasn't open. So once again, before you head down to LaGuardia or any other airport, you want to go ahead and call ahead.
In 5 minutes, I will tell you, 5 minutes before we were evacuated, I had just reported that LaGuardia International Airport had been evacuated. Now, I don't know what has transpired in the 20 minutes since we left the set, if there was a credible bomb threat there or not.
And we had some tense moment at a New York airport today. Just to bring you up to date, a man made a threatening statement at LaGuardia and they arrested him.
Another one that's attracted a lot of attention is a report of a possible fifth plane. Here's where that report comes from. On Tuesday morning, the morning of the terrorist attacks, at about the same time as the other planes were taking off, there was a complaint at JFK in New York that 3 Middle Eastern men were in some kind of an argument with a ticket agent. That they got on the plane, the airline called Port Authority police, and by the time the Port Authority police showed up, the men were nowhere to be seen. They'd left the scene. So that aroused a lot of suspicion that perhaps that was a potential fifth plane. However, a senior federal official tells NBC News that there's nothing credible to indicate that that was in fact a fifth plane. There's nothing to connect that to the terrorist attacks. And in fact, this official says there are many well-meaning reports like that out there that officials have to check out, but that are turning out to be a wash.
Clearly what Pete Williams is reporting on at JFK Airport was the incident with Flight 23. But Katie Tour doesn't simply allow that detailed report to wash. like Pete Williams does.
About that, so inevitably stories start to surface when something like this happens. Yes. Although we're going to look more into that JFK flight a little bit more, Pete, because there are some very peculiar circumstances surrounding that, and I don't believe that flight ever took off. But as I said, we're going to look into that some more.
Now, as the afternoon rolls around after reports about an evacuation and arrest at LaGuardia Airport, if that wasn't enough of a glaring clue that Norman Mineta's flight ban lift was a bit premature and not thought out, then these consecutive reports from NBC's Andrea Mitchell might be.
Katie, I've just gotten off the phone with a senior U.S. official who tells me that we should not assume that the all clear has sounded, that there are more known terrorists to the United States who are both inside and outside the country capable of hijacking an airplane, and that we should be very careful and not assume that this is over. This from a senior official in the U.S. government at a fairly high level. So that, with that warning, we have to be very, very cautious indeed. This official said that we could be sure that we're safe if the FAA could be sure that they can guarantee that a plane won't be hijacked. But despite the new provisions that have been put in and announced by Transportation Secretary Mineta, no one really believes that eliminating curbside baggage check and preventing people from getting on board with knives is really going to be the answer to that. That we do know that there are other people from this ban who are out there. They are very far along in finding out names of people involved in this, as Pete Williams has been reporting throughout.
That is pretty darn unsettling. I mean, what is there some evidence that makes this senior official give that kind of warning? Because
yes, there is.
That's a very serious thing to say and to report.
I can't identify my source on this, but I can tell you that it is at a very high level, and that this is not someone who speaks freely. This is just to say that this is not necessarily all over. This is why these precautions are being taken. This is why the U.S. government is taking this so seriously and is not standing down. We are in a very tentative stage now in the crackdown on terrorism in this country, and it is a new kind of war, as the president himself said in the Oval Office in his briefing to reporters and in his comments to Rudy Giuliani and Governor Pataki. So while they believe that they have protected government facilities and have protected U.S. officials, they do not think that this is over because they have not gotten their hands on all of the people they believe are involved in this cell.
Andrea, just stand by for a moment. We have the President and First Lady outside the Washington Hospital Center.
9 minutes later, the FBI and Ashcroft hold their second press conference where they announce an update on the 9/11 investigation, what's now known to be inaccurate assessment of 18 hijackers. Also followed with Robert Mueller answering reporters' questions.
Additionally, today I announced with the Treasury Department a step that has been taken to provide additional security at airports across the country. As airports reopen and as travel is resumed, there will be substantially increased security presence, on the ground at designated security checkpoints throughout the country. Time.
How many people at this point are detained around the country, and why are these potential accomplices, Mr. Director, of such concern to the Bureau?
Well, I can't give you a specific number. What has happened, as I indicated yesterday, that we're, as a result of following up leads, we're interviewing a number of people. And in the course of doing those interviews, we find that a number of the individuals, when asked for identification and the like, are out of status. And when we find somebody out of status, we quite obviously bring in the INS and they are detained. And that is the policy and procedures we're following.
And they're concerned to you regarding the investigation?
Some may be concerned to us and some may not after we interview them.
What sort of indication do you have of other operations being aborted, other plane hijackings, or perhaps other terrorist operations?
I'm not prepared to make comments about any other items at this time.
How many associates are you looking at? How many hijackers and associates do you have?
Well, obviously, I've just announced that there are 18 hijackers. The number of associates is significant, but I don't think it'd be appropriate for me to try and attach a specific number. We are continuing to develop a an understanding of all the associates that these individuals had. Sir?
Do you believe the associates are in the country, or do you have evidence that
First of all, if we knew exactly where associates were, it would make our work easier. But we are interested in finding associates and making inquiry of them.
According to this official, this is not over. The all clear has not been sounded. This is not the time to stand down. He said until the FAA can assure us that they can prevent all hijackings, we should not be certain that this is a safe situation for people here and abroad, U.S. targets.
Well, it certainly sounds like Andrea Mitchell's warnings are rightly due. Regardless if one compartment of government have the authority to say air travel is safe and okay, other compartment heads, federal security experts beg to differ, with the details surfacing from the ongoing dragnet.
Ed Bradley, word from LaGuardia Airport where they're trying to get things cranked back up again, but they're having some difficulty.
Well, security is very tight. The American Airlines section of LaGuardia Airport was temporarily evacuated in the last couple of hours. A man came in with what was regarded as a suspicious package, and he made some inappropriate remarks about that package. He was arrested immediately. Bomb-sniffing dogs were brought in, and the terminal, that part of the terminal was evacuated. They are now back up to operation.
Well, it looks like we have some answers as to what happened in LaGuardia Airport. But regardless, the show must go on.
Now, as to the key question of who else is out there, this is what a senior government official tells NBC News today, that there is no way to know whether there was, in fact, another attack plan that wasn't carried off. Now, there have been all sorts of reports and speculation that there was a fifth plane because of reports of some kind of altercation between ticket agents at JFK Airport in New York and some stubborn people who were giving them difficulty, and then the Port Authority police had to be called in. That was being looked at as a possible abortive fifth attack because it was a problem that happened about the same time as the other planes took off. Senior officials say they don't believe that incident had anything to do with the terror attacks. However, they can't prove that they have everybody. They can't prove that they got all the hijackers. They cannot prove the negative at this point, that there's nothing else. So the top priority is identifying what they call their associates. They won't give us a number. There have been all sorts of numbers, maybe 40, maybe 50. They're not saying that.
Here's what's going on at this moment. Top U.S. officials have warned the threat of terrorism is not over. There are still associates out there. However, they have no knowledge of a specific plan. A significant number of hijackers are still at large. That is, not the hijackers themselves.
At the same time, the police investigation in the U.S. continues. Today, 2 men were arrested at LaGuardia Airport in New York, apparently in connection with the attacks, though police wouldn't provide details.
NBC News has learned from a senior U.S. official that there are more potential hijackers at large, both in this country and abroad. The official says the terrorists are still targeting the United States and American interests. Information from a U.S. senior official about other possible terrorists or terrorist acts. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is in our Washington bureau to bring us that. Andrea?
John, what we're reporting is that a senior U.S. official says that there are other associates of bin Laden out there. They believe very affirmatively that it is bin Laden, other members of this group, and that they are not only in the U.S. but also overseas, and that these are people capable of hijackings. So they believe that airplanes are not completely safe until the FAA and federal marshals and better protection systems that are now being put in place makes them safe. That this is not over, the all clear has not been sounded. A very stern warning from a top official in the U.S. government who basically says that while we know that 18 of these hijackers are now dead on the 4 planes, that this does not wrap up this terror cell inside the United States.
Now, from this point of the day, under limited sources, we're going to allow a timeline of news reports mostly by way of Understanding 9/11, a television news archive from archive.org that is mostly uninterrupted throughout the evening and week after, at a quick and less repetitive place to tell the story of what should be properly called the events of 9/13, suspicious activity that happened in New York area airports and elsewhere on the evening of September 13th, hours after most airports just started operating again after being shut down for 2 days. After several warnings by news network officials, by 2:55 p.m., news reports started coming out for police activity, now in Newark Airport where Flight 93 took off from on 9/11.
We go now to Randall Pinkston at Newark Airport, which understandably and predictably, Randall, there are jitters around the airports today as they come back to life.
Dan, jitters is the right word. Very, very high security here. About 2 hours or so ago, we observed a plane parked near our location here in the roof of one of the buildings here at Newark International Airport, surrounded by Port Authority police vehicles, we presume possibly some federal agencies, and we have learned that that plane is a commercial plane owned by a company from Saudi Arabia. Port Authority officials tell us that the plane was detained on request of the State Department, and they have also detained the flight crew and security crew. We have seen 4 people in handcuffs brought into this building under the escort of Port Authority officials, and since the plane was held at the request of the U.S. government, we also presume that federal officials will be asking questions of these people. Why would they hold a Saudi plane? Of course, Saudi Arabia is one of America's foremost allies in the Middle East. One possible reason is because it has been reported that 2 of the hijackers had ties to Saudi Arabia. It is a question that we will hopefully find the answer to as to whether this plane, this crew had any connection at all to the individuals, 2 of the individuals at least, who were responsible for the terror across the river in Lower Manhattan at the World Trade Center Towers explosions.
We have organized here at NBC News what we're calling the NBC News Terrorism Task Force, putting our very best reporters on it to keep you up to date on the investigation and what is going on. NBC's Andrea Mitchell is a member of that task force.
We are also told by a top U.S. official that there are other terrorists at large in the United States and outside the United States from this same cell trying to reorganize potentially against American targets, and that these others who are still at large do include trained pilots, potentially more hijackers at large. So this is not an all clear, they say. That's a direct quote. The all clear sign has, the all clear signal has not been called yet. This is not over.
We go now to Randall Pinkston live at Newark Airport, just across the Hudson in New Jersey. Randall?
Dan, as flight operations at airports resume, clearly the focus is also on security. CBS News has learned that about an hour and a half ago, at about 3:30 Eastern Time, Port Authority police detained 3 individuals in the departure area of American Airlines. We don't know why they were detained, but we do know that the police here were awaiting the arrival of FBI agents.
I've just been told that there is currently a ground stop in the New York area. What that means, if there's a ground stop in the New York area, meaning that there are no flights allowed to take off in the New York area, and I'm also being told that there's some FBI activity at those airports as well. So we're waiting to get more information on exactly what that situation is developing there.
Patty, quickly here while we...
Oh, and they certainly do develop from here. And in order to get a comprehensive but yet raw understanding of what sort of additional activity related to 9/11 that is greatly missing for the next hour, we are going to continue to chronicle these incoming reports with minimal narrated interruption.
We are being told from the Associated Press right now that the Senate has been evacuated because of a bomb scare. Let's see if I can get any other information for you. We're also told at the same time, keep up this picture if you would please, but we're also being told that for some reason all departing flights have now been halted once again from New York airports. So it's unclear at this time if the two are related or if there's some new intelligence. But right now, although we were just saying a moment ago that they were beginning to get things back to normal, right. All flights now being halted in New York and an evacuation on Capitol Hill.
Well, Kathleen, first of all, reliable sources are telling ABC 7 News that hijackers who were armed with guns and knives tried to board a jetliner at JFK Airport this afternoon. Now, authorities say that 4 persons have been arrested there. The FAA says there is a ground stop in effect at all 3 New York area airports. And we understand that this incident happened around 5 o'clock this afternoon. First reports indicate would-be hijackers were arrested at JFK as they were trying to board United Airlines jetliner at that airport. There is also a confirmed ground stop at Chicago's O'Hare Airport. Authorities are not saying whether this is related or due to some other event. Bad as this news may be about the incident at JFK, there is also an element of good news. They have apparently thwarted whatever these folks intended to do there.
On, though, the level of concern and a still developing story at this hour, the closure of the New York airport. So this is a ground stop at the New York airports because of concerns about some FBI activity today. Patty Davis is following that part of the story now, and she joins us now from Washington again. Patty.
Hello, Joey. Well, the FAA has ordered a ground stop at all three airports. That's New York, LaGuardia, and Newark in the New York area. They're saying that is due to FBI activity. Now, the FAA says on a call just a moment ago that there apparently have been arrests, and we're trying to confirm that. Earlier today, LaGuardia terminal, the central terminal building, was evacuated due to a scare. A man, according to the Port Authority of New York, made what was interpreted as a threat about a device in his bag. That turned out to be unfounded, but that person was arrested. Now, this apparently involves different FBI activity, different incidents. We don't know exactly what the scope of those incidents are at this point.
We want to tell you that the 3 New York airports, less than 8 hours after having been opened, have now been closed at the order of federal authorities. We are told that arrests have been made at JFK Airport, the international airport here in New York. We have no further information about who the arresting authorities were or who has been arrested.
Ed, Jim Stewart reports from Washington that the detaining, if not outright arrests, of some people at John F. Kennedy Airport which set off a chain reaction, we believe, of shutting down JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. Jim Stewart reports that there were 3 people detained, if not indeed arrested, at JFK for INS violation. It's Immigration Naturalization Service, of course. These are people who, it is alleged, do not have their proper papers. And where that leads, we do not know. But this happens against a backdrop of the FBI and other law enforcement agencies fanning out, trying to gather up those people who helped the murderous skyjackers. The skyjackers, 18 of them, are gone. But the infrastructure that helped them in this country, 10 people or more is the most reliable available guess. Those people have been at large. And at JFK late today, 3 people who may or may not be connected in any way were taken off the aircraft and at least detained, if not arrested.
Marina, ground stop was ordered at New York's JFK Airport this afternoon after an incident involving would-be hijackers. Reliable sources tell us 4 persons were arrested after several tried to board airliners at JFK armed with knives and guns. The incident happened shortly before 5. There are unconfirmed reports the would-be hijackers were dressed as pilots and co-pilots and were thwarted trying to board one airliner before being stopped as they tried to board a United Airlines jetliner.
With many of the developments in the country today in regard to this attack on the United States, we're going to begin with reports because it is the most recent news for everybody in the country about the airports in New York City, because they have again been closed because of a possible security threat. ABC's John Miller is with us to do that. John.
Peter, this is a fast-breaking event right now, and we don't know exactly what it means because federal investigators who are probing it right now aren't certain what the significance is, but they're nervous enough about things to put a stop on things. All this stems from 2 men detained at JFK Airport. The men, both Saudi Arabian nationals, first aroused attention when they presented tickets for a cross-country flight that were dated 9/11, Tuesday, the day that the flights were hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Investigators were called and began to question them. The men said they were airline pilots and presented pilot licenses. That aroused more suspicions because of the background of this story that you all already know. They've been taken to a police facility at Kennedy Airport. They are being questioned still. Earlier today, and authorities are wondering if these events may not fit together, and we may have some videotape of this. At LaGuardia Airport, there was a brief evacuation. 3 men were arrested, or I shouldn't say arrested, were taken into custody there to be detained and questioned when they showed up at the airport with baggage marked crew. Law enforcement sources tell ABC News that their story about being crew for an airline also did not check out. So right now, investigators are trying to sort through who are the two men who are being detained at Kennedy Airport trying to pass themselves off as airline pilots.
And for the first time, video from one of the airports is shown to U.S. viewers of authorities apprehending what seems to be two Middle Eastern gentlemen at LaGuardia Airport.
Where were they going and why were their tickets from Tuesday? And who were the three men at LaGuardia Airport who had baggage mark crew who, according to authorities, apparently don't work for an airline?
Can we absolutely confirm that these men, or at least some men, were in airline uniforms who should not have been in airline uniforms?
No, that's an early report, and I think we can put our finger on it. It came from an airline pilot's website. I think what happened was when the story started to circulate around the airport that the men tried to pass themselves off as pilots, someone gleaned that they were dressed as pilots. In fact, they tried to identify themselves with these licenses as pilots to law enforcement authorities who questioned them, and that made them more suspicious. So they're trying to sort that out.
But it does reflect that people are spooked.
It does, and of course, I mean, to get down to the bottom line, what authorities are fearing, why they are reacting out of an abundance of caution, is the theory that perhaps we are being probed again, perhaps other teams, and it's not to suggest that the men we showed on tape are terrorists or anything. We're not there yet. They're certainly innocent until even accused of something, but the concern is that we're being probed again, that people are trying to pass themselves off as airline employees or crew members to get past security. And of course, in this week, that's something that's making everybody nervous.
It is a whole new world at America's airports.
Back up. Everyone back.
And plenty of those destined to fly today are just fine with that.
I have no problem with being searched, with being kept waiting in a line. It's all security. I'm very happy about that.
All security, very serious. A bomb threat at the Orlando airport turned out to be nothing, but no one was taking chances.
This is a Fox News alert. Fox News Channel has just learned that there has been an arrest today at John F. Kennedy Airport. These are breaking developments just coming into Fox News following word earlier that many suspected that follow-up attacks could happen. Not to say that this was one. It could very well have been an enormous misunderstanding, but it certainly looks like a very negative development at JFK, stopped, according to the police commissioner, due to current security.
Hi, Shepard. At this hour, planes at all three New York area airports are not flying again. That's because men have been taken into custody at all three locations. Now, law enforcement sources are telling Fox News that JFK, at least 2 Saudi nationals were detained. They said that they were pilots and presented what agents believe were fake documents. We just heard a short bit ago from the police commissioner who said that at least one of them was carrying a false pilot's ID. Sources are telling us that there may have been an additional man at that location. At LaGuardia, 3 men were taken into custody after agents said that they tried to pose as crew members. And at Newark, several men were taken off a Saudi airliner after being identified as being on the Immigration and Naturalization Service's watch list. 2 hijackers on Tuesday's flights were also on that list, which indicates people of concern to the U.S. government for immigration issues.
Rita, this investigation seems to be moving along mighty quickly. And how concerned are they about the activities today at JFK?
They're very concerned about a lot of different activities. And in terms of what was happening at JFK, they're not quite sure if these men, as you pointed out, may just be someone who was going in just using false identification, may have no association to this at this point. But what it does show is that authorities are not taking any chances, that they're truly on a heightened state of alert, not going to take any chances when they see someone with some suspicious activity. And particularly in the case of JFK, these were Saudi nationals. They don't want to pinpoint any particular nationalities, but many of the hijackers, according to law enforcement sources, were Saudi nationals and also Egyptians. So this raises particular concern also because these men apparently claim to be pilots. And remember, half of the hijackers, we're told from law enforcement sources, at least all of the hijackers that were actually flying clearly had pilot experience, but remaining, the other half that were on there, we're told also had some piloting experience as well.
On the arrest at New York City's Kennedy Airport, New York City's police commissioner with new information about the suspects. Listen.
There have been a number of people detained over the last 2 or 3 hours at the airports with possibly fictitious identification, one of which I understand was in fact arrested. He had identification indicating he was a pilot. He attempted to clear security, and he was stopped. The identification he had was in fact false. I understand he has been arrested. There are other people that have been detained. They have not yet been arrested, and they're being spoken to by the authorities.
7 people are in custody at 2 New York airports tonight. Reportedly, they produced pilot licenses which appear to be counterfeit.
Well, we were going to take you to Jennifer McLogan a little earlier at JFK Airport, but she had to move, get out of the way for some reason, and I'm going to let you tell us why. Jennifer.
Yeah, we were asked to move twice, so this is our 3rd location here at Kennedy tonight. Big news out of here. We want to bring you the latest news that there are 5 to 6 men being questioned at this hour by FBI, Customs, and NYPD for their possible role in an attempted serious security breach earlier this evening. It is because of that incident the FAA has grounded all flights in and out of the 3 major airports until further notice. The federal officials are mum on the incident, but Mayor Giuliani has told our Marcia Kramer that one of the 6 men allegedly presented a fake ID indicating he was a pilot as he and his party attempted to board an aircraft. That man was arrested. He and his friends were taken to a secret location here to be detained and questioned, and when we first learned of where they were, attempted to raise the mast of our CBS truck to bring you that story, we were threatened with being arrested if we revealed the location of that building. We put the mast down, went elsewhere, and we were swarmed again by security. So now we're in our 3rd location.
10 people are in custody. These 10 people, 9 men and 1 woman, attempted in 2 separate incidents today. One at 4 o'clock at JFK Airport, the other as late as 7:30 tonight at LaGuardia, to board national flights. One a United Airline flight with open full fare tickets. They were armed with knives, carrying false identification, pilot certificates, and certificates from the Flight Safety International Flying School in Vero Beach, Florida, where federal authorities have told us 3 of the suspects from Tuesday's horror took their flying lessons.
There are currently 10 individuals in custody who were picked up at Kennedy Airport and LaGuardia Airport this afternoon. The individuals had originally been booked on a flight to Los Angeles from New York on Tuesday morning. That flight did not take off because it was canceled right after the attacks on the World Trade Center. And following the detention of the 4 men at Kennedy Airport, a female was also detained who was acting, we are told, by high sources in the government, in the state governments in New York State, was playing a supplementary role. And then between 7:30 and 8:15 this evening, 5 men were detained at LaGuardia Airport with the same MO, the same modus operandi as the incident at Kennedy Airport. Now, the reason I raise this again, aside from the obvious reasons that it is news that nobody we are aware of in the government has denied at the moment, nobody has come to us and said we're not telling a story which is incorrect.
One thing you cannot help wondering, based on this information about what federal authorities clearly now believe was 2 new attempts to hijack planes and have change-off pilots, is what were the next targets? There is no more World Trade Center. Was it the Empire State Building, the UN, the federal building where the FBI has left its quarters because they felt it was a security risk? And then the second question you have to wonder was, along with, was there a Washington target? Was it going to be a White House this time, as the White House has already suggested they felt they were on a target list? What would have happened?
And in this state, with all these confirmed reports and mixed details, essentially between 3 New York area airports in the evening, ABC's John Miller's speculation for what could have been potential leftover targets is certainly worthy of addressing, but apparently not to Senator and future Vice President Joe Biden 10 minutes later.
Senator Biden, you've heard these reports tonight?
I'm not sure which reports you're referring to.
I beg your pardon. I'm referring to the reports about the arrests at Kennedy and at LaGuardia Airport this afternoon. Have you heard them?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Did you hear them before we reported them?
The answer is I didn't hear about the arrest. I heard about the prospects of the arrest, yes.
And so you believe that do you believe that there is a continuing effort by some people to get at in broad language the United States tonight, and the details of these reports today are accurate, and therefore, how worried should the country be?
I think that there will be and are people who will attempt to continue to get at the country. I do not believe that the prospect of that occurring is very high for two reasons. One, I think you're talking about, in effect, the second team. And secondly, I think that the focus is increasingly on how these folks basically, in effect, get out of town. So I do think there's some concern. And I think you're, in addition to that, Peter, going to get an awful lot of the screwballs who aren't any part of any organization, doing everything from something crazy aboard an aircraft, or, for example, we evacuated the darn Capitol today. We evacuated based on a bomb scare. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that for a while.
What leads you, Senator, to say that these arrests at Kennedy and LaGuardia today may have been the second team?
I don't think I can respond to that.
Did you mean to infer by the second team that these were the sort of second-rank characters?
I think it's less organized, less lethal, less capable.
You base that?
I'm really on kind of thin ice here, and I'm concerned about making sure that I don't say anything that leads someone as bright as you to ask me the next question and put me in a spot of potentially revealing things I shouldn't reveal.
Well, in fairness, Senator, we're all on thin ice around here, and I think we both appreciate that. And secondly, I think it should be pointed out that in detaining these people at these two airports tonight, the security apparatus indeed appears to have worked in this instance. I would like to know whether or not you were briefed about this as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee before you got to hear it in the press.
No.
Okay. Do you have confidence currently in the intelligence services of the United States?
Yes, to the extent that, let me back up. Okay. I think we are woefully underfunded the intelligence community. We have woefully underfunded and focused on the human intelligence. And I have been a pain in the neck to everybody around here, along with Senator Graham of Florida and a few others, arguing that we should be putting considerably more resources into the intelligence side and the human side of this. But I think the intelligence community, as strapped as they are in relative terms, is doing a pretty good job. It's not sufficient.
I understand that, sir, and I don't for a second wish to be melodramatic. But do you believe that the United States tonight may be, in some form, still under attack?
I do not believe it's still under attack.
And did you believe...
In the same sense that we were under attack on the 11th.
Do you know, sir, why Vice President Cheney was removed to Camp David?
No.
Do you believe that the airlines in the United States should be flying tonight? And I ask that question in the context of the reports that we told you about tonight from Kennedy and LaGuardia.
Based on the reports, as well as the subsequent briefings that I've had, I think they probably should. What is being done is prudent. That is, those who are flying, it is prudent, and I think that it is prudent to continue to escalate the number of flights that are available to be in the air.
But you do believe, sir, that the United States is not under attack and this crisis, in this immediate sense, is over?
From ABC 7 News.
But now, as most viewers likely know, that precisely at this point, then Senator and Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Joe Biden, with Secretary of State Colin Powell, had just met with Lieutenant General Mahmoud Ahmed of the Pakistani ISI regarding Pakistan's position in participating with the U.S.'s retaliation on Osama bin Laden and the Taliban in Afghanistan right after the 9/11 attacks. And also that Biden had been confronted about this meeting, particularly when General Ahmed's involvement surfaced in alleged financing of Hamburg cell hijacker Mohammed Atta through Ahmed Omar Saeed Sheikh not too long after. Although Joe Biden was able to serve as Obama's vice president for 2 terms, if things weren't bad enough then, acknowledging Biden's potential in covering up Pakistani involvement, how much worse does it seem now as far as legacy within covering up 9/11 now added with gross negligence and public endangerment with handling air travel safety and these events at JFK and LaGuardia airports, particularly since now Biden has become president-elect, having defeated President Trump in the 2020 election. But as far as this fiasco with the New York airports, we're not done with Biden just yet.
And one person was arrested at New York's JFK Airport for having a false identification indicating that he was a pilot.
Two relatively new wrinkles. Of the men arrested tonight at Kennedy Airport, they had tickets for the United Airlines flight from New York to Los Angeles on Tuesday morning, the time when all of this havoc began. But their flight was canceled as a result of the New York City police ordering Kennedy Airport shut down at the same time that the second plane hit the World Trade Center. So they never got off the ground. Those were the tickets they were trying to use tonight. This from Pierre Thomas, who covers the FBI and the Justice Department for us. They're now investigating if one of the other teams, the LaGuardia group, were the same individuals who also on Tuesday morning had tried to clear security, but knives and weapons were detected, and they simply backed out and walked away very quickly.
From what details John Miller is updating on the suspects arrested at JFK and LaGuardia airports on 9/13, seems to fill in the possibility that these could have been some of the same 3 Middle Eastern men that intended to hijack United Airlines Flight 23 at JFK on 9/11. But now, there also seems to have been another targeted flight at LaGuardia Airport on 9/11 as well.
But I have talked to some government sources tonight, and what they are telling us is that there were discussions about the incidents between the government and the airlines. Folks are understandably concerned. I don't know if when those discussions took place, they really had the level of detail about these incidents that we have been reporting tonight, but they certainly knew that people had been detained both at LaGuardia and JFK Airport. There was concern expressed.
Facts are still coming in, questions being raised that we hope are resolved and answered by morning. In the meantime, we have late news and new pictures for you tonight. At least one confirmed arrest. The suspects may have been armed with knives, may have presented fake pilot's IDs, may have purchased one-way tickets. Was this a thwarted plan to hijack another American plane? A similar scenario may have played out at LaGuardia tonight. The thought of additional suicide bombers makes air travelers shudder.
No.
Where were you supposed to be going?
London.
For
6 days in London, 8 days in France.
Will you just reschedule now?
No.
You will not fly again?
Probably not if I can help it.
Compared to ABC's John Miller's reporting a few hours earlier differentiating the incidents between the 2 New York airports, specifically with the 2 Middle Eastern men taken into custody in the police squad car at LaGuardia Airport a couple hours after it first officially reopened, CBS 2 News' Pablo Guzman was actually reporting from a prime position at LaGuardia Airport, giving a bit more in-depth details about the overall concerns there and items the suspects were caught with.
Hi, you heard Jennifer McLogan just a little while ago talking about the situation at JFK. About an hour after things started to develop there, something began to happen here at LaGuardia, and some men were stopped, detained. They are still here being questioned. They had credentials on them, trying to pass themselves off apparently as members of a ground crew, but that didn't check out. Now, there was something that added to the concern here at the time. I'm going to show you what it is. This plane was on the ground. Note the markings on the fuselage. It says United States of America. When you see that at first you think it's Air Force One. It is not Air Force One. It is a G3 level plane. It is the plane that carries the advance team. As you just heard, President Bush said he is going to be here in New York tomorrow. He will be here in New York tomorrow, and the team comes in advance to make various preparations and connections. Now, with that plane on the ground and with people coming in with credentials that didn't check out, knowing what had just happened at JFK, you can imagine the concern here at LaGuardia. That happened around 4:30. You know what time it is now? Those folks are still in there being detained, not arrested. They have to be charged first, but the questioning goes on. And the questioning goes on because the authorities are wondering if this was not some sort of second wave. What happened at Kennedy, what's happened at LaGuardia, what may be happening elsewhere. A lot of the experts on this have felt all along that because the other side, if you will, sees that they are at war, what happened Tuesday, unfortunately, that's not the end of it. And if you have 5 cells, let's say, maybe there are 15 or 20 cells, some cells whose job perhaps it was to wait a couple of days and then try to make a move. It seems, though, that at Kennedy and at LaGuardia, that was thwarted. Now, also here at LaGuardia earlier this morning, 2 men were arrested because there was a suspicious bag. A man came over to that bag, said it was his. There was some credentials that didn't check out once again. A younger man came and said it was his son. That didn't check out. It turned out that there was some identification that claimed to be a Massachusetts driver's license and a pilot's license. Now, given the aspects of this story that reach to Massachusetts, that reach to people training as pilots, they were immediately seized and taken away by the terrorist task force. So that happened earlier this morning, and then this afternoon, the incidents at Kennedy and at LaGuardia Airport. So it seems to be ongoing.
Well, Tom, throughout the day, the federal assessment of how serious the situation was in New York has been constantly changing. At first, we were told this was a minor problem, possibly some immigration difficulties. Then there were reports that these people had knives. Then we were told that wasn't the case. Now, we're told that members of both of these groups tried to board the airplanes using falsified documents, claiming to be, for example, airline pilots or employees of the airport. We are also told that authorities got on to these people because their names matched names on a watch list of suspected terrorist sympathizers. Now, the immediate question it raises is, was this another attempt or 2 more attempts to hijack domestic airliners and stage more suicide attacks? That is a question federal officials cannot answer tonight. But after first saying this didn't appear to be very significant, now they say it is. They're obviously very worried about this. It's obvious they're worried about it from the fact that they closed down the New York airports. No conclusions from federal officials tonight. We're going to undoubtedly hear about it tomorrow.
Terry, I gather that the administration has been reluctant to give any information on this story, but what can you tell us at this late hour?
That is putting it mildly, Ted. The White House in particular is being very, very careful with this story. One of the missions right now that the president has is try to reassure the country. This is obviously an unsettling story, and they are staying away from it. I do, however, have from one White House official the confirmation that the president is being continually updated on this situation, and he's aware of it.
But let me ask you just to give me one more quick word. Is the White House refusing to confirm or deny the story? Is the administration refusing to confirm or deny the story of those arrests that were made at JFK and LaGuardia? Or are you at least getting some off-the-record guidance?
Well, we are getting guidance, being told that the president is being continually updated and is aware of the situation. Most officials I reached, frankly, were not aware of it. They had not heard it until I told it to them. When they got back to me, I got a flat, we aren't touching that. But we did get from one official this word that the president has been made aware of this.
This becomes the first in a set of appearances throughout the night and early morning with passengers who thought they were going to depart to California aboard American Airlines Flight 133 at JFK Airport until they were in the middle of witnessing suspects being arrested.
There you go. Ted, that's Jim Hunter, who was a passenger on American Airlines Flight 133 to Los Angeles from Kennedy tonight.
Terrific. Yeah. So this is actually, because we did hear before, I know that Peter interviewed one of the people who was on the LaGuardia flight. Mr. Hunter, tell me what you saw, tell me what you experienced.
We were on at the gate for about 2 hours. We boarded about an hour late. It was a 4 o'clock flight. It was supposed to be the first flight on a regular scheduled basis for American to go out to LAX today. And we boarded about an hour late, and then we sat on the plane for about 2 hours, or maybe a bit more than that. And then near the end, the captain came on, was trying to make, walking through the aisles, trying to make everybody calm down. He was talking to me and a few other passengers. At that point, he ultimately came back on the air and told everybody that we were going to go, and we were all very happy and feeling very good that we were going to be able to get home and see our families and stuff. But about 10 minutes later, the door was still open, which is unusual, and literally a few minutes after that, about 20 or more police officers, many in SWAT gear with large guns, all unholstered and looking down the aisles, screaming at everybody to go and hit the floor, and we all hit the floor. And meanwhile, there was a commotion going on behind me, about 4 or 5 rows behind me, where they were subduing a passenger. And he was definitely resisting and trying to fight off, but it was obviously worthless given how many policemen were on the airplane. And then 2 other passengers that were right in front of me were ultimately asked to go with authorities as well. They were taken to a galley, handcuffed, and then led off the plane from the front as well. So there was quite a bit of commotion, followed by dogs and looking for bombs and everything else before they would allow us to get off the plane.
Well, mercifully, this seems to have ended about as well as it could have, and I'm very happy for you and the other passengers, and thank you so much for coming in.
New York airports, having been opened early in the day, then were closed rather suddenly. LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark later in the day. Among the things that happened is a man who tried to use a fake pilot's identification to get past security at John F. Kennedy International Airport was arrested. 5 other people were detained.
Jim Olsen was at Kennedy Airport tonight when there was an altercation at TWA. As Pete Williams has been reporting, it turns out to be a more serious incident than we may have first realized. Some people were taken into custody carrying false pilot IDs, and they were trying to get through. Mr. Olsen, just describe for us what you witnessed.
Well, Tom, let me first correct you. It was actually an American Airlines flight that I was on, just to clarify that, bound for Los Angeles. We were supposed to leave at 4, sat on the tarmac for about 3 hours. And after they cleared us, after the captain came on and said we were cleared for takeoff, basically about half a dozen to a dozen stormtroopers or SWAT team burst through the back door of the plane, had us put our heads down in crash position, and they dragged out at least 1, and I heard later on approximately 3 potential terrorists.
My God, what were you thinking at that moment?
It was surreal. I mean, it was like a scene from a movie. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and you see these things on the studios, but you never think that it's real. So it sort of took a couple minutes for it to set in that it was real. And then when you see SWAT team members with big guns and big bullets right at your side, it sort of really hits home.
Describe the person that they took off the airplane, if you can.
Couldn't really. We heard a lot of kicking and screaming and bustling. There were some accents that I couldn't really make out, some foreign language, but clearly they took somebody off board. We were in sort of a crash position, so you couldn't really see things clearly, other than at least a half dozen people sort of storm by you.
And where was this person sitting in the plane?
They were in the front section of coach.
Okay. Any indication tonight from American Airlines when you may be able to resume your flight?
I've been trying to get home to Los Angeles for 3 or 4 days now. Certainly, this is a very sad time, and there are a lot of other people out there that have a lot bigger concerns than me right now. But I hope to be home in the next day or 2.
Well, Colleen, indeed that is true. The airport's open today, but the police were closely watching. One of those people arrested was at Kennedy Airport.
And just about 16 minutes later, after Dan Rather's report about the subsequent closures with the arrests at JFK and LaGuardia airports, in a compelling twist, he and Anthony Mason first report the 9/11 incident with United Airlines Flight 23 at JFK Airport.
About events surrounding Tuesday. And Anthony Mason, you have a very good example of this in a story that came to light today.
Yeah, the Associated Press, Dan, is reporting, citing a law enforcement source, that the FBI is investigating whether an altercation which occurred at Kennedy Airport on Tuesday may in fact have been another aborted hijacking attempt. Now, this Tuesday incident occurred about 9 a.m., which was the same time, of course, the 2 planes slammed into the World Trade Center towers. Apparently, a United Airlines plane, Flight 23, bound for Los Angeles, was boarded. Passengers on board were told they were not going to take off. And 3 males traveling on this plane refused to disembark. The Associated Press says the argument with a member of the flight crew became so heated, the crew member called airport security. But by the time security got there, the 3 men had vanished. As I say, the FBI is reportedly now investigating this whole incident, which occurred at Kennedy Airport roughly at the same time as the other 2 attacks, and whether this, in fact, may have been a hijacking as well.
I thought it was especially interesting Anthony, that the Attorney General, he wouldn't give a number of the people who might still be at large, that is, people who didn't get aboard the hijacked planes, but in some ways were part of the conspiracy. And it's a hunch, and you say, well, don't report your hunches, but when security got heightened around the White House today and when some airports were shut back down, you had to think that part of that was because they were still hoping to catch some of those people still at large. Now, a source quoted by the Associated Press as being, quote, knowledgeable of the workings of the airline industry, said the man was arrested at Kennedy Airport. That man was checked in sometime between noon and 4 p.m. today. The man was trying to board American Airlines Flight 299 bound for San Jose, California. The man had been scheduled for an earlier flight on Tuesday bound for Los Angeles. Now, we reported this incident before this evening. But that flight, the one on Tuesday, which was due to take off around 9 o'clock in the morning, New York time, the flight was canceled after the terrorist attack began in the World Trade Center.
The police commissioner of New York was quoted this evening as saying he has no idea whether the man arrested or those detained were connected to the terrorist attacks on Tuesday.
But certainly one could understand why the FBI is very interested in a man who has an altercation on the plane, if the reports are correct, an alleged altercation on the plane
That's a separate incident we're talking about, Dan, that occurred on Tuesday on a flight that was scheduled to go to Los Angeles, but was canceled because of the attacks on the World Trade Center. It was roughly the same time, 9 a.m. 3 males on that flight, United Airlines Flight 23 bound for Los Angeles, refused to get off the plane. The FBI, according to the Associated Press, is now investigating this incident to see whether it may have been an aborted hijacking.
Well, one can see why the FBI and other law enforcement agencies they'll be busy for a long while trying to sort out all of these things.
As you can tell between Dan Rather and Anthony Mason's precautionary reporting, they seem to think that the suspects arrested at JFK Airport were likely the ones attempting to hijack Flight 23 on 9/11. However, as we continue with follow-up reporting, some of those upcoming details will answer that question.
For whatever reason, the two groups detained, we have heard nothing on their whereabouts or disposition. And earlier this evening, we spoke with a passenger who was on an American Airlines flight. Wow. Now, you're sitting there with a, partial plane load, full plane load worth of passengers waiting to go to Los Angeles. And given the climate right now, actually, you're on the ground in a city where the World Trade Center is gone. That must have scared the hell out of everybody.
It was surreal. I mean, it really brought terrorism within arm's reach. I mean, you see these scenes on TV, but it's a whole different experience when it's only a heartbeat away. And everyone was very calm before it happened. Everyone was actually looking forward to getting home, and it really changed the whole equilibrium of the plane once this all happened.
Had you seen any words exchanged prior to this with those passengers and members of the flight crew?
Not at all. I was actually sitting in the back of the plane, about 3 rows from the very back, and it was just, we don't even really know exactly which seats those passengers were in. They were in the front end of the coach section of the plane.
Because we have learned since that a total of 8 people were either arrested or detained. All of them seem to have a common thread: impersonating airline employees, telling one story only for officials to learn that the truth was something else. And the wildest theory of the afternoon was that perhaps another set of potential hijackers was going to try the same thing with a commercial airline.
It all began at this United Airlines terminal, Port Authority sources tell News Channel 4, just after 5:30 this evening. Here's what we know so far. While already on board and awaiting unloading by other passengers, 3 of the suspects are confronted by the crew. And it's not clear why the crew became suspicious, but when escorted off the plane, one claimed to be a pilot and displayed a pilot's license. Sources confirm that that license was, quote, bogus.
Well, 4 men detained at Kennedy Airport were picked up after they boarded a United Airlines jet bound for Los Angeles. And Peter Black was a passenger on the plane at the time. He talked later with ABC's Peter Jennings.
We got on the plane late. We sat on the plane. We were forced to wait for a while. They didn't tell us anything. They told us there were government regulations keeping us there. Finally, after about 2.5 hours, they told us we were finally okay. And then about 15 minutes after that, the back door of the plane opened, and about, it's hard to say, 15 to 20 fully armed SWAT team members filed in. They told us all to put our heads down, and they ran through the plane, grabbed a passenger, handcuffed him, and carried him out.
And how many passengers did they take off in that condition?
From the main cabin, I only saw them take out one. Afterwards, we heard they took two out from business class as well.
Okay, I believe, in fact, in the final analysis, there were 4 men who were taken off 133, which was scheduled for Los Angeles. What was it like trying to get into the airport and onto the airplane before you were put in that position?
It was a lot of lines and queues and waiting, and not a lot of very evident security.
I beg your pardon, did you say not a lot of very evident security?
Not a lot. There was a lot of, looked like tired people working at the counters. There were a lot of people who were fatigued and very, very cooperative. We went through metal detectors easily. You know, I showed them my driver's license. They gave me my ticket. I went upstairs, waited for the plane, boarded the plane.
How did you get your ticket?
It was an e-ticket. I handed them my driver's license. They handed me my ticket, and I went upstairs. They asked me the question, did you pack your bag?
They asked you the usual questions about security. So you were able to take hand baggage on the airport, onto the airplane with you?
Yes, correct.
Okay, there has in fact been no restriction from the government on that basis today. And I assume that you and your fellow passengers were pretty shaken up.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah. More than that, I think.
Where are you this evening?
I'm at home, thank you.
In New York City?
In Brooklyn, yeah.
In Brooklyn, but you were trying to go to Los Angeles?
Yes, a mistake.
A security crackdown at 2 of New York City's major airports has resulted in at least 8 arrests. Law enforcement sources tell CNN the group includes at least 4 people who were seen at one of the airports on the day of the attacks.
Security at JFK is very tight. Tensions here are very, very high. All over JFK, we see police with shotguns. Some of those police officers posted on top of airport headquarters of police. And they've moved in heavy construction equipment to block entrances to that building. Inside that building, police are questioning several people they took into custody, some believed to be Saudi nationals. Police have arrested one man who posed as a Delta pilot and carried a fake ID badge. He was trying to get on a flight, and sources say he had a ticket dated Tuesday. And also, we're told that some of the men were carrying knives. And at LaGuardia Airport, 3 men were taken into custody after agents say they tried to pose as crew members. And across the river at Newark International Airport in New Jersey, several men were taken off a Saudi plane after being identified on a INS watch list. One last thing tonight. Police are investigating an altercation at JFK here on Tuesday. There was a 9 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. 3 men became angry when the flight was canceled. Security had to be called. And by the time security got here, those 3 men had disappeared.
New York's 3 major airports are closed this morning after 10 men were detained on Thursday. One of them tried to get on a flight to San Jose, California after showing a pilot ID.
Authorities in New York City shut down all 3 airports again last night after as many as 10 people were detained in connection with Tuesday's attacks. Police at Kennedy Airport arrested a man trying to get past security with a fake pilot's ID. As many as 9 others were detained at Kennedy and at New York's LaGuardia Airport. Officials say 2 groups tried to board 2 separate flights. There are reports that some of them were carrying knives and false identification. Shocked passengers at LaGuardia watched as police boarded their plane.
A whole slew of about 20 policemen came on. You know, several in SWAT gear, others that were just, you know, Port Authority police with pistols, all guns out and blaring, but not. And we all were told to put our heads down. And they, meanwhile, were wrestling this guy in the back, and they dragged him off. And there were a couple people sitting right in front of me. They also asked them to come off. They handcuffed them and took them with them.
Greg, here at JFK Airport, instead of getting ready to resume flights in and out of here, we are shut down, have been shut down since late yesterday afternoon. Several security incidents here, also at LaGuardia. Let me tell you what happened. There was an incident on an American Airlines flight yesterday. It was headed to Los Angeles. 3 people were taken off at gunpoint by police who secretly boarded using a catering cart. They were taken off the flight. And there were also other incidents here. Meanwhile, yesterday afternoon also, apparently the FBI was investigating an altercation on a United flight also bound for Los Angeles. And when asked to leave the plane, the FBI boarded and asked everyone to leave the plane. A couple of people refused, 2 to 3 people. Actually, when security asked people to board, police were called, and by the time they arrived, those people had vanished.
Aside for the additional details added by Virginia Shaw, how the police secretly boarded using a catering cart, aside for her fumblings, what she seems to confirm here is that the FBI were already at JFK Airport still carrying out an investigation on the incident for United Airlines Flight 23, right while these reported attempts to reactivate hijacking missions occurred.
No sooner had air travel slowly started up Thursday when authorities suddenly stopped it at New York's 3 main airports late in the afternoon. Officials picked up a total of 10 people in 2 separate groups, one at LaGuardia, the other at JFK Airport.
But there is more news, perhaps, well, indeed it seems likely, that there were more hijackings planned, hijackings for yesterday, and John Miller has details on those.
Charlie, that's exactly what federal authorities believe. They believe that 2 teams tried to infiltrate airport security.
And we said earlier, some of them had indications from their tickets that they were going to be on flights on Tuesday. So they could have been additional operations on Tuesday.
They were booked for Tuesday, so all indicators are whatever it was they were trying to do yesterday, they were supposed to do by plan on Tuesday. Yet, the minute airspace was reopened, they showed right back up at the airport and tried to get on flights.
Now, John, as we're going to find out in a moment, the American Airlines flight at Kennedy, where SWAT teams went on board and took 3 people off the plane and put them under arrest. That was a flight bound for Los Angeles, a West Coast flight, the same kind of flight, cross-country flight, 4 of which were hijacked on Tuesday. But you mentioned that one of the flights was at LaGuardia. For people who don't know, LaGuardia doesn't have long-range flights. Was it a flight that was going to stop somewhere on the way to the West Coast, or do you know what that flight was?
I believe that flight was to San Jose, and LaGuardia doesn't have international flights, but they do have coast-to-coast flights.
Do they?
Yeah.
I didn't realize. Okay.
Let me ask you this, though, the big question. As you're talking to all the sources, and you have phenomenal sources on this, as we know, are they saying to you, this is not over? There are more of them out there. Stand by. Anything could happen any moment?
Yesterday, before this, they were indicating to me that based on the materials they'd gone through, the names, the associations they made, they felt that they had a universe of 40 potential hijackers. Now, you had 18 involved with these first 4 flights, 10 yesterday. By their math, that leaves the potential that there are 10 more. That would have added up, if you sparse the teams evenly, to 8 flights. So
Notice that even John Miller is alluding that there was a potential for a range of 8 hijacked flights on 9/11.
Up if you sparse the teams evenly to 8 flights. So we had 4, then the indicators that there was an attempt to bring that to 6. So they're really still on a very high alert, and the watch list that kicked in at Kennedy and LaGuardia yesterday, of course, are now in the possession of every airport in the country.
As already the story about the suspects carrying weapons between the 2 New York airports had already been removed by government officials, here is Jim Stewart in an effort already attempting to marginalize the incidents, detailing that they have not been charged for any crime, contrary to early reports that at least 1 person is arrested.
Good morning, Jane. The real news here this morning is that there have been no arrests, despite reports throughout the night that groups of people have been taken into custody in connection with Tuesday's attack apparently are unfounded. There have been no arrests as yet for anyone directly believed involved in Tuesday's attack. We need to also clear up some reports here that there have been another attempted hijacking at New York's JFK Airport. There were published reports that 2 groups of men attempted to hijack an aircraft there last night. That is not true. There were reports that men armed with knives were caught on board aircraft at John F. Kennedy Airport. That is not true. What we are told is that at least 1 man is in custody, perhaps as many as 10 others are being questioned, and what they are in violation of could range from anything from INS violations to fake identities, any number of things, but I don't sense anyone believing that they are directly involved with Tuesday's attack.
Now this becomes the last appearance of Jim Hunter, who witnessed some of the arrests at JFK.
And eventually, after about 2 hours, the captain came through on the PA and then through the airplane And he was spending a lot of time focusing very heavily on people's cell phones and electrical devices and those types of things, and personally saying that he was going to start confiscating them if people didn't put them away.
It's unusual for the captain to be doing that.
Yeah, especially when the door of the airplane is still open. Most people that fly a lot know that when you're at the gate, the door is still open, you can continue to use cell phones, generally. But he was being adamant about it, and we thought new security precautions, put the phones away. And eventually he came through my part of the cabin. He was talking to me and a few other passengers right around me, and he had, at that point, confiscated some high-tech headphones, like noise reduction headphones that looked like to me, from a woman that was sitting in front of me. And right around that same time, he came back and he said, he was just talking. And one of his first officer had come back and demanded that he go to the front, that it was urgent, that he needed to go to the front of the airplane. And one of the other passengers said, well, maybe that's good news. And the first officer said, no, it's not good news, or sort of shook his head. But the odd thing was 2 minutes later, the captain came on and he says, good news is we're going to the West Coast. And we're all thinking, great, we're headed home. And so get in your seats, buckle up, and we'll be ready to go in just a few minutes. We all got in our seats, and about 20 minutes later, we're wondering what's going on. Then suddenly there was a commotion behind us as the police had stormed in from the back of the airplane and had converged on right around row 19 of the plane, which was a few rows behind me, to basically secure a passenger that was back there. There was a lot of yelling and screaming and kicking as I looked around, and
yelling. The passenger yelling in English, or
no, not in English. And he was definitely a foreigner.
Did he resist?
He was absolutely resisting. He was kicking. He was screaming. He was very unhappy with the situation, obviously, based on what I was seeing. But I also turned around back to the front pretty quickly, because right at that point there were 15, 20 additional police officers coming at us in full SWAT gear with the helmets on and the rifles and pistols and the whole 9 yards, and trying to secure the airplane as quickly as possible. And there was a gentleman that was in row 8 right in front of me that they took into custody as well. And the woman with the headphones that was in front of me, one of the other passengers pointed out that she had actually boarded the plane with the other gentleman that they took into custody. He did not resist. He went very quietly. But they took her into custody as well. So I saw in 3 that they took 3 people into custody.
10 people were taken into police custody in New York's 2 major airports on Thursday.
The latest coming from New York airports is that there have been 10 people, approximately 10 people arrested at the airports. At LaGuardia Airport, there have been 5 to 6 people arrested. And at JFK Airport, there have been 3 to 4 people arrested, and one of them is a woman. These people have been reported to carry knives and flying manuals and false IDs. And one man, at least one man, had tried to get on an airplane using a false ID of a pilot. Now, these people have been questioned by authority, and they are suspected of trying to carry out another hijack activity. When one of the New York reporters, local TV station reporters, interviewed an Israeli man stranded at JFK Airport waiting to go home to Israel, the young Israeli said on TV, now the Americans can finally feel what we have always felt like. And a man sitting next to me watching this TV, an American man, said, well, if not for you, we wouldn't have to feel this way.
Jim Olson was on one of those planes and when it was stormed by SWAT teams. Jim, good morning.
Good morning, Katie. And next thing you know, there was just a loud voice that said, everyone down. And you could just hear these really stormtroopers or SWAT team members just running down both aisles with guns, in hand.
It must have been pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it was surreal. I mean, it was, on the one hand, you sort of felt like you were an extra in a bad movie, but then at the same time, it was surreal. You didn't really know what to think, and then it finally sort of hit you that these were potentially terrorists that were on your flight, and it finally you finally realize it finally touches you, or this whole event reaches out to anyone, not just folks who live in New York.
Couple of other pieces of news.
Overnight, 2 more raids by the FBI of motels in the Deerfield Beach area, and then late last night, the Florida Highway Patrol put out an all-points bulletin in connection with the terrorist case to look for 7 Arab men in 2 different Lincoln Town cars that were rented in Fort Myers, Florida, one way headed for New York City.
Lincoln Town cars headed for New York. Okay, thanks, Brian.
But it does sound like at the New York airports, they got some of these guys last night when they raided this plane. The worry is they don't know how many more they don't have.
This also becomes the last appearance of Jim Olsen.
An American Airlines flight out of Kennedy Airport. Jim Olsen, who joins us now live this morning. Jim, good morning to you. What exactly did you see?
Well, it all happened very fast. I looked over my shoulder, and there were half a dozen FBI SWAT team members standing there, and within probably about 2 seconds, they ordered us to put our heads down in a crash position, and they stormed through the plane, and we could hear them dragging out at least one person, and I learned later there was probably about 3 people that they ended up taking out.
Was there any resistance that you could tell, and what language was being used?
Well, you could definitely hear, I heard at least one distinctive male voice. I don't want to really speculate on the ethnicity of it, but it was clearly not English.
And Jim, this was all happening on the plane, and how long had you been on that plane?
We had been sitting on the plane for probably a good 3.5 hours at that point.
And were you wondering what was going on?
Oh, certainly. I think there was a high level of anticipation and actually excitement, because the last we had heard from the pilot was that we had a clear for pushback from the gate, and we basically at that point sat at the gate for another 15 minutes, and then they burst through the back door.
Look, Jim, you know what might have almost happened to your plane flight and your plane. I mean, this was a plane that was supposed to take off apparently on Tuesday, and it was canceled when all air traffic was grounded after the first attacks. I mean, it may very well have been that yesterday yet another terrorist attack was foiled, and you were right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I didn't get much sleep last night, and but I think it is. I think that at least in this case, the security measures they had in place worked. So I think that should be commended.
Look, you've been trying to get back to Los Angeles the last 3 or 4 days, as I understand it. You going to try to fly back to Los Angeles in the next few days, or you maybe thinking about a train?
I don't know if you can get a train ticket for me right now. I'm just trying to get back any way I can. I'm eager to get home.
Additional details have just emerged. We've had access to someone who has been over an extensive debriefing of one of the crew on that plane. And according to the member of the crew, they were all gathered in the waiting area to board the flight. There were airline employees flying non-revenue, deadheading they call it, just taking the plane back to their base in LAX. There was also an individual there who had an LAX ID card. They didn't have enough crew to fill out the plane, so they were asking some of the crew members who were off duty if they would work the flight, and most of them just said that they were just too exhausted to do it and too emotionally unprepared because of what they'd been through because of the deaths of their friends on the other plane. And at that point, they say, this gentleman stepped forward, flashed an LAX ID card and said, well, I'll crew this flight. I work on the LA end. And the LAX people didn't recognize him. They thought it was odd, but not so much at the time. And eventually, enough crew did show up, and then he was given a passenger seat instead of a crew seat. But then it turns out when a SWAT team stormed the plane, and the FBI agents moved in and identified the people that they suspected as hijackers and associates of the other hijackers, this gentleman was one of them. So an indication that among the false IDs he was carrying, there was a false ID of an airline crew employee, and that he was attempting to take a position on the plane where he might have access to the cockpit and essentially the run of the ship.
And add to that the earlier reports that we had that possibly they had some flight attendant uniforms from someplace.
Right, and that was from another airport, and those people were later released. But again, it's a sign of how jittery people are across the country. But this kind of underscores the idea that there was a very active effort yesterday when this guy saw an opportunity. If the details of this debriefing show that he was trying to get special access to the plane, which would have been an advantage to a hijacker.
At New York's LaGuardia Airport, this was just one of the arrests. At least one was reportedly carrying a fake pilot's license. Some apparently had penknives.
And around 8:42 a.m. on the morning of September 14th, MSNBC begins a domino effect, retracting all the stories suggesting that the arrests at the airports were not foiled hijacking attempts, but instead manifesting into suspects allegedly attempting to flee the country. So instead of bringing any clarity, the media attempts to assert that it's all clear. Nothing to see here, folks. Without any communique explaining how such misreporting could be so detailed and not have happened.
We can now say that the crisis has passed at New York's three airports, Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK, which were very abruptly shut down yesterday afternoon after a series of, we can now say, remarkable coincidences that caused officials there to overreact. It's probably safe to say, but it's probably also safe to say understandably overreact given the situation. Now, here is what we now know. Two separate incidents, unrelated, but both oddly coincidental. In the first incident, a man who is an actual legitimate pilot boarded an airplane, tried to board an airplane. They checked his identification. Everything was fine, but he also was carrying identification for his brother. I'm not sure why, but he was carrying an ID for his brother. Now, here's where the odd coincidence comes in. That brother at one time lived at a Boston address, which was also at one time the address for some suspected associates of known terrorists. So that set off all kinds of alarms. Then, shortly after that, 9 other people, so we're dealing with a total of 10 people here, 2 separate incidents, 9 other people try to board an airplane with stickers or tags on their luggage that strike airport officials as odd, because they think that these people are trying to masquerade as airline employees. When in fact, it turns out, these people were all legitimate passengers who were trying to go to a conference put on by the Boeing Corporation. Boeing, of course, the big jet manufacturer, made the 2 jets that were involved, the 2 kinds of jets that were involved in Tuesday's suicide crashes, the 757 and 767. You put all this together, an ID issue, the people that it appears to airline employees are trying to masquerade as airline employees. That's what the airport officials think. They blow the whistles, they shut down the airport, they question these people extensively, but now they're satisfied it was all a false alarm, and as I say, an overreaction, but an understandable one. This may not be the last of this, but they're satisfied that the situation at JFK and LaGuardia is now totally resolved. There were no weapons. They're satisfied now, they say, that this was not an attempt to hijack these planes.
And just in the nick of time to add to it, Joe Biden attempts to discredit all the reports from JFK and LaGuardia, as he already first attempted to yesterday evening.
A very powerful, very well-known senator, Senator Joseph Biden from Delaware. I want to talk to you about a few things. You are the chairperson of the Foreign Relations Committee, so you have a lot of information about what's been going on. First, let's start with what happened in New York. There have been a lot of reports overnight last night about some detained people in New York at the airport. Tell us what you know.
What I know is to be factual, and last night I couldn't say this on air. Those people have no connection whatsoever to what happened at the World Trade Towers or the Pentagon or this organization and network. 2 things happened, Kate. One guy, an actual pilot, got on the plane, coincidentally had his brother's identification as well. His brother happened to live in an apartment complex that was one in Boston where some of these people had actually been. Totally coincidental. 10 other people were going to a Boeing conference. They had stickers on their bags. They worked for Boeing or were invited by Boeing. I'm not sure the detail. The folks at the airport thought, hey, wait a minute, are they impersonating crew? And they weren't. One guy was arrested and detained, and it was a screwball who was acting out. Was acting out, just saying and demanding. I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, demanding to get on, making problems, and they arrested him. All the rest of these people have been released. There is no connection whatsoever. Now, what happened was, because we're all on such high alert here, they closed down all those airports until they knew that was the case.
But you're confident that that's the case.
I'm confident that I've spoken to the director of the FBI, the number 2 guy. I've spoken to the CIA and George Tenet. This was 6 o'clock this morning, as late as 6:30 this morning, which is an hour and a half ago. or whatever.
What about other leads and other, there have been many other, we've been reporting many other places where investigations are underway.
Well, there are.
Florida.
Kate, there are, and there will be other people arrested. These guys didn't operate alone. Last night when I was responding to another program, was I aware of what was going on, I thought they were talking about investigations of baggage handlers, of people at airports, etc. That is thoroughly, we have 7,000 FBI agents out there combing the countryside, and you will see other arrests. But one thing people should understand, there is no evidence that there were people trying to get on a plane to duplicate what happened at the Pentagon or in Pennsylvania or in the state of New York.
Is there evidence that there could be more to come? Do you have a sense for that?
I'm not at liberty to speak to that except to say people should not be, I understand their fear, but people should not be fearful that there's an imminent prospect of a similar event occurring. We're going to get all kinds of threats, Kate.
Let me go back to the investigation just for a moment, since you do know so much. What can you tell us about whether these were cells of people who knew each other, who didn't know each other? Do you have any sense for how big an organization we're talking about?
Let me be careful here. We have evidence that there were a number of cells, all knowing one another, all in part of the game plan, that were able to pull off this god-awful event. I think in the next days, Kate, you'll see some very concrete evidence of that presented to the American people.
Will we see a declaration from this Congress tomorrow declaring support for force?
What you may see is as early as today.
At earliest today?
You may see it as early as today,
okay,
Kate.
Thank you,
I'm
Senator.
going in to present it now.
And just after 2 hours of ABC's Good Morning America, not only opening with detailed coverage about the incidents most thorough at JFK and LaGuardia with John Miller, as well as having gone the lengths of bringing a witness in studio, Miller unenthusiastically follows protocol with also retracting the stories at the airports.
Well, last night we heard the news that there had been some detaining, at least, arrests of people, pulling people in from airplanes. The alarm went out. Everybody concerned the potential hijackings, additional hijackings had been foiled. And John Miller has some news on that front right now.
And some very relieving news. Federal authorities say after investigating the stories of the people that they arrested last night, they've been able to release most of them. Out of the 4 taken into custody at Kennedy Airport, they've released 3. One is still being held for further investigation. Now, what federal authorities are saying is that so many of their alarm bells went off last night that they felt it was imperative to storm the airplane with a SWAT team to take these people into custody and to order all flights in and out of New York shut down while they sorted out what they believed was 2 attempted hijackings. Now they say after a night of investigation, the confusion stemmed from the false ID. They've established that one man was using his brother's identification, the man who was claiming to be a pilot. Also, one of the individuals lived at an address in Boston that showed up in the FBI's database as the address of another suspected terrorist. The 4 men at LaGuardia Airport, whose luggage was marked as if they were members of an airline crew, have told a story that they were on their way to a conference of airline manufacturers, and they've been able to corroborate some of that. So what they're now saying is what appeared to them to be 2 attempted hijackings and 2 groups of terrorists may now have checked out to be a series of extremely unlikely coincidences at a time when they were geared up to be extremely careful. So they're still sorting through this.
So is there any way of knowing if this is an all clear, or is this just insufficient evidence?
Well, it's a balancing act. It seems that they certainly wouldn't have gone so far as to release 3 of the 4 people at Kennedy Airport, although some of the law enforcement people I spoke to today even were frustrated and felt that required more investigation. But they're still of the opinion that they don't know who all the players are. They're still operating with a list of 52 other people. And, I mean, the level of coincidence, the fact that some of them had been in Florida, that some of them had taken flight training at the same school, are the kinds of things that it was just too much at once for them last night to not shut down the airspace, to not hold these people. I mean, they were taken away in handcuffs. They were under arrest. They were not free to go, but ultimately not charged because, as bizarre as it sounds, despite the terrorist connection to one of their addresses, The fact that one was using identification which was not his own, although it does check out now to be his brother's, despite that series of coincidences, much of what they say has been able to be corroborated to the extent that authorities believe they don't have enough to charge them with anything.
For those of us here in New York, it was one of the scariest things we could have ever heard. As it turns out, those reports were simply false. What happened? Well, apparently, there were just a number of coincidences. Senator Joseph Biden was on the Today Show talking about this about half an hour ago.
The reports this morning are erroneous in terms of who was arrested, what they had in their possession, and why they were arrested. I've spoken at length with the FBI and the CIA, and the truth of the matter is there were no box cutters, there were no knives. What happened was there were people who were now doing the right thing. We're checking the name and the bag and the name of the bag. Anybody didn't have the same, that doesn't mesh, then they get pulled off a flight. We now are doing things relating to the backgrounds on people who are on planes. We pull people off of planes. The one guy that got arrested is a guy who was acting out, some screwball who was acting out, but he did not possess knives or box cutters or any of those.
There was
things.
nobody. Let's bring back in John Miller because we want the very latest on the arrests that were made yesterday, the releases that have taken place now.
That's right. Federal authorities are actually giving us some very comforting news last night, having set off alarm bells that they felt that there were two hijacking teams about to hijack two new planes, separate arrests at LaGuardia and Kennedy Airport. After questioning these people through the night, they've released, as far as we have it, all but one of them, and they just want to go over some more details with the last man about some other issues. But it's a chain reaction of confusing events that you almost couldn't recreate if you had to. When they get to the airport, one guy shows up, and airline counter people feel that they recognize them as people who tried to fly on Tuesday. The names don't match, but they believe that these are the same group that tried to fly on Tuesday, the day that planes were crashed into the buildings. So they alert authorities. Then when they investigate one of these individuals, he has identification, and he says he's a pilot. But when they examine his pilot identification, it's under a different name. Now they have a man with multiple identities who the airline people are suspicious of. That against the backdrop of later, when they're on higher alert, 4 men at LaGuardia show up with baggage that identifies them as part of an airline crew. So one thing led to another, Of course, some of these people had already boarded the plane in the case of Kennedy Airport, which was stormed by a Port Authority police SWAT team backed up by FBI agents from the terrorist task force who arrested 2 men and a woman and questioned them through the night.
But a couple of things so that we don't leave people alarmed. They were indicating to you, authorities were early on in the night, that they thought they had foiled a couple of more hijackings. They no longer believe that because they've let these people go.
They believed last night, when they conducted these raids, handcuffed these people, and took them into custody, that they had 2 additional cells of people who were going to use the same M.O., again, because of the false identification, the claims of being airline personnel, and the fact that they were together but sat separately in different parts of the aircraft. All of this made them very suspicious. And the statements of airline employees who were suspicious.
Here's the mayor now of New York City to start his news conference.
The misinformation yesterday was a cause of real concern. Same thing was true about the alleged arrest last night and information about box cutters and knives, and none of which was verified by the police or the FBI, all of which was publicized, all of which turns out now to be untrue. So if we could all be a little bit more patient and verify the information before we put it out.
Bryant, there were reports throughout the night and into this morning that there was an aborted hijacking attempt at John F. Kennedy Airport. These reports are just simply not true. There were 2 incidents that occurred. Everyone who was stopped and taken into custody in a rather violent manner by FBI SWAT team members have been released.
Now I want to go to ABC's John Miller. John, just as you were making your way from one ABC News building to the other, I told people there was a measure of relaxation now in the general intelligence community because after this great disconnect last night between New York and Washington, the FBI, at least, appears a good deal calmer about those incidents at Kennedy and LaGuardia that so many federal officials last night were reporting.
Yes, that's true. And as for the people who were arrested, handcuffed, and taken away last night, most of them have been released at this hour. All of these things raise suspicions. When the FBI got involved, they began to check into the people's backgrounds and found that one of them had an address in Boston, which was an address of another suspected terrorist who had surfaced in this investigation, which set off even more alarm bells. Through the night, as they questioned these people, they were able to discern that the men with the stickers and tags on their luggage identifying them with different airlines were on their way to an aeronautical conference. They explained that they weren't trying to pass themselves off as crew members, but in fact that these were keepsakes that they had collected along the way.
Which led us at the time, of course, to question seriously whether or not the airspace should have been opened at the time. We heard other former, I must say, in this case, Federal Aviation Administration officials and some military, ex-military officials who actually believed that there were aircraft in the sky last night which should not have been in the sky. But among the other things it speaks to, John, because in fact the federal officials in Washington are only now appearing to catch up to a more, well, I should say that, are only beginning to communicate now a more realistic appraisal of this story. And how much of a disconnect between the two cities does this speak to?
Well, I think in an investigation this size, there's a lot of squirreling away of information till it's verified, so that New York was operating with raw data, both on the police level where it started and on the FBI level where it ended. And I think Washington was just a little behind the curve because New York wanted to finish the investigation before briefing them. Although I must say, ABC News was in communication last night with people in the FBI's SIOC, their Special Operations and Information Command Center, and they were aware of many of the details of this last night and were able to verify those details. And they were not aware of some of the other details and weren't able to verify them, although those are details which are actually contained in the police reports that were written up about this. So you can see how it developed last night. Indeed, today, what's odd is some of the initial investigators who started the ball rolling on this and learned in the early stages about the multiple identities, the connections from addresses to other terrorists, are still concerned that, you know, there's part of this story that they didn't get. But the federal agents who worked through the night to carefully backtrack and verify these stories are satisfied that what looked to them like a set of two hijacking attempts and a coordinated effort is actually not that at all.
There are just two more things, neither one of them small. In those initial official reports last night, there were mentions that these people on the aircraft at Kennedy particularly had weapons, and there was, I believe, a specific reference to box cutters.
No box cutters.
No box
Specifically
cutters.
Knives was what was in the reports.
Knives, you're quite right. And do we believe that now not to be the case?
We believe that now not to be the case, and we tried to sort through that confusion too, and we got some help from Pierre Thomas at the Justice Department, who says...
our Pierre Thomas, yeah.
Our Pierre Thomas at the Justice Department, who covers the Justice Department and the FBI for us, says that in sorting through the bags, since one of these individuals identified himself as an airline employee, his bags may have been mixed in with crew bags, and things they found in bags that didn't belong to these individuals may have been credited to them. So that's still a little foggy to me, but the bottom line is you can't say that there were 5 people armed with knives on that plane, and the initial reports were not all of them, but some of them were.
Good morning. Again, I'm Barry Martin. I'm the Assistant Director of the FBI here in New York. Following on the Mayor's comments, what I would like to just reiterate is, again, the whole investigative effort of the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is the FBI and NYPD and a number of other federal agencies, is to identify the hijackers, their support systems, where they were since they've been in country. And in that regard, we are doing numerous interviews, running down hundreds, or if not thousands, of leads around the country. We are responding to numerous calls from the airports to reiterate what the mayor has already told you. The reporting that has been going on all night, I can definitively tell you, is inaccurate. We were out at both airports last evening. We did talk to approximately a dozen individuals. We have only one individual left who is still being questioned by the task force. All other 10 have been released and have been on their way. One brief reminder is that it is a pending criminal investigation. We are not going to be able to satisfy all of your demands. We will have to protect the investigation as best we can. However, as it pertains to public safety and traveling and what we can release, we will release it as soon as we can. As the mayor said, we would appreciate you verifying any of this information with us.
Questions?
Barry, can you tell us what happened at the airport specifically? How many people were detained? For how long were they detained? What were the reasons for the detention?
They were detained for a number of hours, but I would be quick to point out that they were cooperative with law enforcement. Again, it's primarily just Soundex type names that have been furnished around the country that we are getting some hits on. Other than that, as one quick example is that, as I mentioned, is some people did want to exchange tickets. It was unclear to the people at the ticketing agency as to what was going on, so we were called in to assist in that particular regard. There was one report while I'm up here that there's a number of witnesses that said that people were taken forcibly off a plane. I cannot verify that at this particular point. I'm trying to run that down. Supposedly there's a number of credible witnesses that saw that happen. It has not been reported to either the commissioner's command post or my command post. We're trying to get to the bottom of that. Again, this is going to continue to happen. We are talking to all of the security departments of the airlines and requesting that they do contact us if there's any question.
Two-part question.
Is it correct that one of the
that have been called?
false ID as a pilot, and is he the one still being held?
Again, it's, as I mentioned earlier, this criminal investigation. I'm not going to get into the details. All I will tell you is there is one individual that was detained. He is still with us. He's voluntarily with us. We're continuing to run out a lot of things. Subsequently, there may be charges. I'm not sure at this point, or he may be released.
We understand
there was a report there were a number of unusual coincidences together that led to some of these detentions. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, they're not necessarily tied. Again, the airports were closed. When they reopen, and it's being, again, everybody is being overcautious, if you would, and rightfully so. However, when they initially opened a lot of the international flights, there was some confusion. A lot of these came in at the same time. They continued through the night. I'm sure they're going to continue through the next several days. We'll respond to them, try and clear them up as quickly as we can.
With being adamant about not disclosing details according to the riddled pieces of information by Barry Mon amongst the arrests and detainments between the two New York airports, he seems to suggest that there were 12 suspects detained, but that 10 of them were released while one of them was being held for questioning, without giving any specification of which airport they were detained from, or if they were the suspect with the fraudulent pilot's license. However, since they are officially saying that these were not thwarted hijacking attempts, in a very unconvincing situation of absurd coincidences to the contrary, mainly already with the earlier reported details that the suspect, who is a pilot with fraudulent documentation, had an address in Boston belonging to Associates of Terrorism. So we need to continue with the timeline of news reporting just a little more to see what actually surfaces, and find out just how cooperative this remaining suspect is, as Barry Mon stated.
Good morning, Michael. Well, a mix-up driven in part by overcautious police and airline personnel. That's how officials in Washington are explaining the detention and questioning of 10 Arab nationals or Middle Eastern nationals. That's 9 men and 1 woman yesterday at JFK Airport and here at LaGuardia Airport.
But interestingly, as the all-clear has been made, reporting from LaGuardia Airport, UPN 38's Paul Floranges interviews a widow from the Oklahoma City bombing who was stranded over the airport closures.
As we've been reporting all morning long, the airport is closed, but there are people there who are trying to get out. A short time ago, I spoke to one woman who's trying to get to Chicago, who knows all too well the pain and suffering family members of the victims of the World Trade Center collapse are experiencing.
My husband was killed in the bombing in Oklahoma City, and I lived through that. I just want to get back home to my family there. So if I can make it back, I'm sure they're all praying for me, and that's the best anyone can do right now.
At around 11:10 a.m., CNN's Mike Betcher for the second time lists the early anomaly of 18 hijackers accounted for. Basically, all the major news networks go silent to simulcast a national day of prayer and remembrance at the National Cathedral in D.C.
New York City airports reopened today after a dozen detained people have been cleared of suspicion. There's one person at last report still being detained.
The New York area's 3 major airports reopened just a short time ago. That after it was determined there were no new attempts to hijack planes yesterday.
Okay, now let me just ask you one other question, Pierre, for the moment about the incidents in New York last night, which so alarmed authorities at every level here while it was going on, and then which the FBI had some rethinking about overnight as it got closer and closer to the information. What is its current status? How many people of the 10 who were arrested at LaGuardia and New York are still being held at LaGuardia and Kennedy?
Well, Peter, we think only about 3, and there's one person in particular that they still are somewhat interested in. This is the person who was a pilot. He came on board with a relative's identification. They were a little bit surprised by that. They couldn't understand that. They continued to interview him, but a source I talked to just an hour ago said that they do not think that they will be able to hold him much longer as well, Peter.
Between ABC's Peter Jennings and Pierre Thomas's exchange, they seem to clarify exactly that 10 suspects between the 2 airports were released, and how many left over are detained, with the one suspected pilot still being voluntarily held for questioning, which comes to a total of 3 out of the initial dozen plus 1. But could this mean that these were the same suspects who attempted to hijack United Flight 23 2 days earlier on 9/11? Let us move ahead so we can determine what really happened at the 2 airports and bring closure to September 11th, as we puzzle the pieces together further to see what we can determine, and also find out some answers as to who exactly is this pilot suspect linked to that's alleged to be associated with terrorism.
This morning, the American networks were reporting that those being held had been planning 2 more raids and had been carrying knives and fake IDs like the attackers on Tuesday. It was a sensational story, but it wasn't true.
We're going to be picking up people around the world and in this country who we may find have had connections to this organization. But it's a very different thing than picking them up with what was reported, that there was a second round of World Trade Tower, Pentagon type attacks about to take place. There is no evidence of that whatsoever.
After returning from the day of prayer at the National Cathedral, the Department of Justice holds its 3rd press conference with Attorney General John Ashcroft, officially updating what CNN and ABC had already made public an hour earlier, that the amount of 9/11 hijackers was now 19 rather than 18.
Today, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released a list of 19 individuals who have been identified as hijackers.
Also, FBI Director Robert Mueller answered questions on the ongoing investigations, as well as inquiries about the airport activity.
One other point I'd make before we respond to questions, and that is that we have dispatched sent to the various major airports, FBI agents, teams of FBI agents, to assist in quickly resolving any incidents that may come up when passengers or passengers are attempting to board an aircraft or obtain a ticket, and there's some question raised, so we can minimize the inconvenience to the person who may well be stopped and also swiftly resolve the issue. And with that, I believe we're happy to take whatever questions you might have.
Director, have you obtained under seal or otherwise any fugitive injustice warrants or level any kind of charges against anyone to this investigation?
Well, under seal, I probably couldn't tell you, but I can say that there have been no FBI arrests at this time. Any detentions that have occurred have been pursuant to immigration holds where an individual has been out of status. Yes, sir.
Director, there were 2 people removed from a flight last night, I guess, in New York, and those 2 people's names appeared on a list. How did they get on? How were they able to board if their names were on?
Well, I can tell you that that was pursuant to a watch list. Other than those names were pursuant, were on the watch list for reasons not related to this investigation.
The difficulty we've got here is there are really so many pieces to this puzzle, and they're only just coming together. We hear of a report that someone might have been detained. Initially, it's an arrest. So the information that we're getting is sketchy, but we're beginning to put together the pieces of a puzzle.
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of it soon.
Meantime, the investigation intensifies. Authorities continue to hold the man arrested at LaGuardia Airport last night. He was carrying false ID, posing as a pilot. But others taken in for questioning at New York area airports yesterday have been cleared of any connection with the terrorist attack.
Meantime, authorities are relieved to report that some confusion led to the 3 New York area airports being closed last night, that it was nothing more than that. More than 10 individuals were detained but eventually released. Authorities were concerned that they may be involved in planning another attack since some had improper identification and included the 4 Arabic men who refused to get off a canceled flight on Tuesday that raised suspicions. Again, at this point, all of them have been released, and police believe that they do not appear to pose a threat.
Well, it seems Fox News' Rita Cosby confirmed what we've suspected in the past 24 hours about the arrests at JFK. As you may recall, what Tim Minton first stated to Matt Lauer on NBC's Good Morning America September 13th, when the airports reopened, about the incident with Flight 23, that 3 Middle Eastern men refused to disembark, and they eventually met with a 4th man once the flight taxied back to the gate, and then all fled the airport. This is all likely why Rita Cosby is detailing an anomaly about there being 4 Arabic men in total who refused to get off a canceled flight. But just by basing this off common sense, assuming that these are the Flight 23 suspects on 9/11, the 3 leftover suspects from JFK, including the pilot, are not being held as terrorists momentarily themselves, since authorities are clearly covering up that there were additional hijacking attempts when the airports reopened at this point. But we need to continue to find out what these suspects are being detained for, particularly the associated terrorist link to the pilot.
Tom, senior U.S. officials are telling NBC News that U.S. intelligence is not ruling out further attacks by a long shot. That could help explain why there is so much of a big tense atmosphere around the airports around the country and also in the streets of New York City. The nation's airports and police have been warned by U.S. intelligence officials the next few days are critical. Terrorists may not have finished attacks on American targets, leaving airline employees and the investigators who back them up on edge. The New York airports remain closed until noon today because of 4 separate incidents, resulting in the questioning of a dozen passengers who were held but never officially arrested and finally released.
I heard stomping, everybody down, everybody heads down.
John Weinbach was in the middle of one of those incidents on a New York jet scheduled to take off for Los Angeles last night when police stormed the plane, handcuffing one passenger, wrestling another to the center aisle.
You can't fault them for, being on the ready. It was just frightening.
In other developments today, some of those who were detained last night at New York Airport suspected of plotting a hijacking were released today. One man remains being held while police further investigate him. And in New York City today, police are detaining 2 more people that were called in as suspicious by a Manhattan hotel, both Saudi Arabians, both of whom had pilots' uniforms and certificates from a Florida flying school. They're still being investigated.
And confusion. It was confusion at New York City's airports that left them closed yesterday afternoon, according to authorities now. It appeared that there were a number of arrests. Turns out one may have been the case, a number of detainees, and a lot of misinformation surrounding that situation. Fox News anchor Todd Connor's live now at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York with an update. Todd?
Hey, Shep, yeah, you're right. A little bit of confusion. However, Justice Department and law enforcement officials telling us that there were 4 incidents here at JFK and LaGuardia airports last night. There were 12 men and a female companion taken in for questioning. In one of these incidents, 2 men were actually taken off of a plane because they apparently showed up on an FBI list of people who they wanted to question. In all, of the 13 taken in, the FBI says only 1 is still being questioned.
At this point in the evening of September 14th, Fox News reaffirms what NBC already reported a couple hours earlier with the 4th witness account from JFK, that law enforcement officials confirmed that there were 12 suspects between 4 incidents at 2 New York airports, repeating that there is only the additional suspect being questioned. Aside for additional sparse evacuations or the 2 incidents with suspects at New York Airport on a Saudi airliner, there will be brief additional anomalous incidents and details as we continue, as there will be some explanations to the degree of groups of suspects being detained, either under Immigration Naturalization Services or as material witnesses at other airports or areas with the FBI's mass pent bomb, twin bomb, dragnet investigation. But to stick with the main focus of New York airports, LaGuardia likely being the first case with the 2 suspects detained and being hauled away in the police car, then 5 more arrested later in the afternoon with what seemed to be a cover story that they were going to an aeronautical or Boeing conference, rather than trying to pass themselves off as airport workers with items in their possession. Plus, the culmination of reports throughout the night also suggests the possibility that there could have been additional women involved in there too. But most importantly, given with the situation at JFK Airport, given the disposition without being able to decipher which ones could have been suspects for Flight 23 on 9/11, there is also 2 incidents between the situations of there being 5 suspects with 2 pilots, one of them being detained with a SWAT team aboard American Airlines Flight 133, and another possibility in the pilot lounge. However, most certain there is confirmed reports with the suspects disguised as airline workers, specifically in reference to Delta Airline uniforms. We will come back comparing these different incidents and others ahead, but let's see what's the outcome with at least the main suspect arrested, who's the pilot, and the other 2 detentions from JFK.
At New York's airports, open for the first time since Tuesday's terror attacks, travelers like Gene Bose were crossing their fingers.
What is your feeling about travel, about moving around when something as horrific as happened this past Tuesday occurred?
I'm a little nervous, and I think the scare last night that turned out to be a hoax at, was it LaGuardia or Kennedy? It frightened me even more.
Adding on to the story that's breaking while we're on the air this hour, the information that the FBI has what it calls a material witness and has issued an arrest warrant for that material witness. Our rock-solid reporter in Washington, Jim Stewart, reports that that material witness is believed to be in New York. Now, there's no name, no further information. For one thing, it's sealed, under court seal.
Right now, there is no evidence that any other terrorist actions are in play. However, authorities do believe there are terrorists at large who supported the hijackers. With us now is John Walsh, the host of America's Most Wanted on Fox.
Well, certainly the FBI is looking all over the country, as many law enforcement agencies are, the U.S. Marshals, etc. A lot of them are probably trying to get out of the United States right now. Some of them are probably still here figuring, you know what, we're going to wait for our next orders.
Now, for the past couple of days, Brian, FBI officials have been telling us they've made no arrests. Well, now that has changed. We're told the first arrest has been made in New York. We don't know who. The person was arrested on what's called a material witness warrant. What this tells us is that the officials, the FBI, does not have any evidence at this point to indicate that the person they've arrested was guilty or was a conspirator was somehow involved in the bombing, but they want to hold this person. They believe this person has more information.
Pierre?
Yes, Peter, we've just been giving you the following information by the Justice Department. A material witness warrant has been issued for a suspect in the investigation. We have not been told where this person is or if this person is in custody yet. We're being told that this information is under seal, which means it is secret. Let me explain what a material witness warrant is. That is a warrant that is issued when it's demonstrated that a person has information that is highly relevant to a criminal investigation and when there is a risk of flight, a high risk of flight, Peter. Again, this has just come out. A material witness warrant has been issued. We're checking now to see if this person is in custody, and if so, where.
And that, of course, is the key question. It is possible, if this man is in custody at the moment, he is being held under immigration rules which allow the government to hold someone pretty indefinitely without any charge.
True, Peter, but this is a step beyond the immigration detention. And what I mean by that is this is a warrant specifically to hold this person because they have highly relevant information and are at high risk of flight. So this is specific to the investigation, but not a generic charge simply just to hold them.
Jim, what have you got?
Dan, it's true. We apparently have our first official arrest in this case, but it's not clear what involvement this person had. The individual, who has not been identified, is being held in New York under a sealed material witness warrant, which technically means they have first-hand knowledge of the attacks. No further details are known about the suspect.
So who the hell is this material witness they keep reporting about?
Peter, we now have additional information on that material witness arrest warrant which has been issued. We're being told by sources that the person who has been arrested has links to a relative of Osama bin Laden.
Well, it seems that the Boston address associated to terrorism on the pilot ID to the now material witness suspect arrested at JFK Airport belongs to a relative of none other than Osama bin Laden, who for the past several days, if not instantly after September 11th, has been suspect number one for the attacks, even though it's not until the following day bin Laden publicly denies any involvement in September 11th, for which he later calls the attacks admirable. But let us see what they will reveal about this prize material witness, who undoubtedly had to have been one of the suspects involved in the attempt to hijack United Flight 23 at JFK on Tuesday.
There's no information that this person was involved in the attack, but because of that link to Osama bin Laden's relative and other links, they do feel that this person has highly relevant information, and they also say that they feel that he is a risk of fleeing the country.
Did they tell you where this material witness is at the moment?
Yes, he's being held in New York. The additional information we have is that he's one of the people detained at JFK yesterday, Peter.
Exactly. Thanks, Pierre Thomas. I wanted you to add that so that we could go to John Miller here. John, this is all part and parcel of these two incidents last night, one at Kennedy and one at LaGuardia Airport, which totally spooked the authorities here, which we reported for much of the evening, and then the FBI got kind of anxious about this morning.
Yeah, they dialed back on it this morning and released most of the suspects, but they've held on to this one individual. Today, at a press conference by the Port Authority police, they explained their rationale behind the raid and so on. And when they said they'd released all but one, they were pressed by reporters, why are you holding the one you're holding? And they were very circumspect, only saying, we have sufficient grounds to hold that person. And that apparently relates to what Pierre is talking about.
Do you know anything more about the basis on which they're holding him?
Well, this was what we were told was one of the things that set off big alarm bells, which is, you know, they ran a lot of information through databases, and apparently the address he used up in Massachusetts is an address that was resided at by a Osama bin Laden brother who resides here in the United States. And of course, that raised everybody up, and they're trying to investigate beyond the address. Is there any personal connection?
Do we know that he had a fake ID when he tried to get on that aircraft last night? Or actually when he did get on the aircraft?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that is actually reversed. He had a fake ID that he presented to get on the aircraft, and then under questioning he produced a pilot's license, but the name on the pilot's license was different. And he explained that the false ID he was using was a relative of his, but that the pilot's license was his real name. And it turns out he really is trained and really is a pilot. But the identity he used to get on the flight is not his name.
The Coast Guard, too, is on high alert, stopping incoming boats for inspection, and last night boarding a cruise ship near Miami to detain two suspects. A flurry of arrests at New York airports proved to be a false alarm, but the FBI investigation has made significant progress.
The first known arrest in the attack on America, what law officials call a, quote, material witness, is now in a federal lockup in New York in FBI custody. Two other people in federal custody are said to be cooperating in the investigation. They are said to have significant knowledge about the attacks and are now talking.
A couple of other things. The one person that we heard about arrested tonight on the material witness warrant is one of the men who got into the altercation yesterday and caused the shutdown of the airports in New York, LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. He is a person who had some disparity in his identification papers. He's been very unwilling to talk to investigators. The FBI thinks he knows more than he's saying. They can't prove that. They don't know that for sure, and that's why he's being held on a material witness warrant.
Reports that there may be more terrorists out there, and word tonight that the first arrest has been made in the terrorist attacks. So we begin in Washington, and our Justice Department correspondent, Kelly Arena, with the details.
Sources also say that there are currently 27 individuals in custody on immigration violations who may or may not know anything about the incidents. Investigators have also put out a so-called watch list informing various authorities, including Border Patrol and the FAA, about 150 individuals the FBI says may have information that could be helpful in the investigation. Now, if those people are found, they will be detained for questioning.
ABC correspondent John Miller has been staying on top of the investigation. So much has happened. John, just bring us up to date. Where are things now? Just what do we know?
Well, right now in the case, Barbara, they have their first arrest. Now, that's a much better headline than it is a story. A man who federal authorities refuse to identify has been charged as a material witness. He was arraigned today in federal court in White Plains in a sealed proceeding. The papers that detail what he's a witness to or what they hope to glean from him are also sealed in secret. But the judge did order him detained and held, so he is in federal custody tonight.
You know, yesterday when there were the reports of people in New York airports, one wearing a uniform, supposedly, trying to be a pilot, and we heard about all of these different people. All of that's just gone away, those people?
Well, all of those people have been released, but for one. They spent a long night at Kennedy Airport trying to sort out through a series of unlikely stories. Some of the incredible things that set off alarm bells in that case were, one of the passengers tried to board the plane with identification that was false. It was not his. He claimed it was a relative's. That actually checked out. At the same time, he produced a pilot's license, which had a different name on it, which actually that name turned out to be his. So he's posing as somebody he's not, then he's identifying himself as someone he is as a pilot, which also checked out. He had had flight training also in Florida, where the other hijackers had trained. And then add to that, one of the subjects gave an address in Massachusetts, which, are you sitting down?
Yeah.
Was the address of Osama bin Laden's brother, which only made them about twice as much suspicious as they were before. So at that point, they said, everybody stop. They separated them. They interrogated in different rooms. The men taken into custody at LaGuardia were released as a result of a mix-up. Their bags were labeled that they were airline employees when they weren't, but they said these were keepsakes they collected at aeronautic conferences they attended. The Kennedy Airport people were released, except for the one who had that very coincidental address. They're still looking at him.
Well, at least they're trying, aren't they?
But last night they were operating on a very dark assumption that somehow they had two new cells.
Yeah, everybody this something really seriously has happened.
So much so that they invaded an aircraft with a SWAT team, that they closed air traffic in New York at all three airports, including one that wasn't even involved in the incidents. It took them a long time to get that sorted out. But this morning, as they kind of lined up the coincidence that gave them that thinking, it was with some relief. Even so, they're still operating on the premise that this may not be over, that they have other names, and that there could be other teams out there that they want to find.
So look, we just heard, Peter was talking about the fact that the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense are all going to be at Camp David. And this was something that we are authorized to report. Why? I mean, why say exactly where these three men are going to be when there may possibly still be terrorists out there?
I think that they are in a terrible conflict in Washington between the political process and the democracy and the security process, and they're thinking at one time the security people are going to want to maintain a level of safety and secrecy. On the other hand, I think that the people on the political and White House end really want government to appear as normal. They want the president and vice president to appear together. They want the country to have some confidence. And in those conflicts, most often the security people prevail. And every so often the political people say, you're the security people, do what you have to do, but you're going to have to deal with this.
But they are finding that there's footprints of Osama bin Laden at different places in connection with the case. In fact, one of the people they detained yesterday is a person who had links to a relative of Osama bin Laden, and that is one of the reasons why they are holding that person as a material witness in this investigation, Ted.
Now the feds are telling us one of those people was arrested on a material witness warrant. Who that person is or what they know, we don't know. Well, despite all of that, things are starting to get back to normal here at JFK and other New York City airports, as normal as things can be after being attacked by terrorists who hijacked 4 airplanes and killed thousands of Americans. Air traffic is continuing to pick up. However, the terminals are still quite bare. Airport buses are up and running, but most are running around nearly empty. Surprisingly, most of the people we spoke to didn't seem too concerned about flying. They just want to get home or go on vacation, wherever they're headed. One man I spoke to was trying to get home to Israel. Said he'd had a tough week. Told me he'd been to the World Trade Center on Tuesday morning. He went to the top. He came back down and was walking away. Then he heard an explosion.
A man who authorities call a material witness has been arrested. It is the first arrest to be announced in this probe.
Matt, good morning to you. That man arrested when he had false identification in New York. Authorities not satisfied with his answer, so they're holding him as a material witness. But as for what federal officials consider one of their hottest leads, it's the detention of 2 other men stopped on a train. Investigators believe they may have important information about the terrorist support network.
Pete, I want to go back to the one person who was arrested here in New York. Is it my understanding that that is the same person who was arrested on that plane at JFK on Thursday during that incident that we thought was irrelevant?
Taken off the plane, that's right. They don't believe that he posed any risk. They're not detaining him because they believe he intended to do anything illegal on that airplane. The reason is they still are not satisfied with his explanation about why he was getting on the plane. The problem with his identification papers doesn't add up, and they are not at all satisfied with the answers he's giving investigators.
Investigators have made the first arrest in the case. It's someone who is nabbed at JFK Airport. Now, yesterday we told you that Senator Biden said that none of those arrests were related. Turns out one was, and that person is in custody, considered a material witness.
At the time, authorities considered him to be relatively harmless, but they were still bothered by the fact that his identification papers for his pilot identification didn't seem to add up. But he is being held on this material witness warrant because they believe he may have information and he's just not telling them anything.
Law enforcement sources say investigators say that there is an ever-widening circle of people that they have on a watch list, and they believe that there were other planes that were supposed to be hijacked or other targets hit, but somehow those planes were thwarted when some of the planes were also kept on the ground or detoured. In addition, the man arrested in New York on a material witness warrant, sources say, was trying to pass himself off with a pilot's license issued to his brother. As you said, he's seen as very important. Now, there are others being sought connected to Texas and to other flight schools in Florida, especially in the Vero Beach area. In addition, there was also a man with French-Algerian documents who is being tracked by authorities near Boston in the summer, according to sources. Authorities won't say if he is in custody, but he is being seen as connected to this case. In his apartment, authorities say, according to sources, that they found aviation material on Boeing planes and also that he was attending flight school.
Who Eileen O'Connor is really talking about is Zacharias Moussaoui, who is actually of Moroccan descent. Let's see what the status of his detainment amounts to.
They're being looked at. There are things, but they could be coincidences. So we must warn you that this is very fluid.
But there's no question about it. This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring them to justice. We're taking a variety of measures to make sure that the American people are safe, just as the Attorney General spoke about. But we hope, obviously, that the measures we take will allow the American economy to continue on. I urge people to go to their businesses on Monday. I understand Major League Baseball is going to start playing again. It is important for America to get on about its life. But our government will be on full alert, and we'll be tracing every lead, every potential, to make sure that the American people are safe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
John, more on the investigation?
Yeah, here's the latest right now. A total of 25 people have been arrested on immigration charges as this investigation continues into the horrific attack. None has been charged, but some of the detainees are cooperating. All of this from a government official who wants to remain anonymous. Still only one arrest directly related to the attack. That's a man in New York whom the FBI detained at JFK Airport on Wednesday. They say that he's associated with the brother of Osama bin Laden. The man arrested is the one detained Wednesday. He had his brother's pilot's license in his possession, and he is now described as a material witness.
I'm joined by Joe Cantamesa, who is a retired special agent with the FBI. He was involved in special operations in the New York office in 1993 when the World Trade Center was bombed. Michael Cherkasky is president and CEO of Kroll Incorporated, a private investigation company. Michael was also a prosecutor in the first World Trade Center bombing case. Michael, I want to go to you on some of the news that we have today, and that is that 25 people have been held on immigration violations, in addition to the fact that one person has been arrested as a material witness. Does this mean that we have 26 of the people involved in all likelihood?
Not necessarily, Dan, but it does mean that we have people who, in fact, we have suspicions of, and we have, conveniently, we have a number of different, both civil and with material witness, criminal types of actions that we can take to detain these 26 people.
But you can only hold them for a certain amount of time, right? On immigration violations, you better find out more quickly, or they have to be released.
Right. We have 72 hours on the 25 and an indeterminate amount of time on the material witness. So we've got to act quickly, but it was sufficient to hold things in place as we develop more information, which we're doing.
So, Joe, how do you think that they came up with these 25 names? I mean, obviously we don't know, but what would you speculate they have on these 25 people? How did they go about finding them?
Well, certainly the massive and immediate assault by the FBI agents and their professional support staff to track down and identify all the lead material that immediately surfaced.
These are names that you think came up, that a neighbor, a friend, an associate, a receipt, somehow led to these people? Or are these people who, very well could just be someone who might have crossed paths with one of these people?
Well, of course, that is a possibility, but I would expect that most of the information that led specifically to these individuals came from that immediate and startup of interviews and investigative efforts.
Well, the second warrant, Joey, was issued in New York. It was issued for material witness, but that person is not yet in custody. There is only one other material witness so far in this case, and this was a man pulled off of a jet Thursday at Kennedy Airport. He was found to have fake pilot's ID. Now, Justice Department spokesman Mindy Tucker is saying we're at a point now where there will be more frequent and additional warrants.
Iraqi President Saddam Hussein has issued an open letter to the U.S. urging the administration and its allies to avoid the use of military force in response to Tuesday's terrorism. Saddam says, quote, "America needs wisdom, not force." He asked, quote, "Will the rulers of America try wisdom just for once so that their people can live in security and stability?" Saddam says he doubts the White House would respond violently if the attackers were from a Western country. His letter continued, "Just like your beautiful skyscrapers were destroyed and saddened you, beautiful buildings and homes dear to their peoples were damaged in Lebanon, Palestine, and Iraq by American weapons, some of them used by the Zionists."
Britt, the Justice Department says that we're at a point where there will be a flurry of warrants. Just a minute ago, just about 5 minutes ago, the agency said that a second warrant has been issued for a material witness in the case. This person so far is not in custody. And officials say another man viewed as a material witness who was served with an arrest warrant yesterday afternoon is the same man who was taken into custody Thursday night at John F. Kennedy Airport in New York.
An additional arrest warrant has been issued for what they're calling a material witness. Now, this is the second time the federal authorities have issued one of these arrest warrants.
Tonight you're going to see something that nobody else has seen. And tonight it's all about justice, because we need your help to catch the bastards who did this.
Day 5 of the investigation, and federal agents now confirm that at least 25 people are being detained in connection with the attack. Some are being held merely because it appears they're in this country illegally. But others, sources say, are getting a closer look. including the 2 men taken off a train on its way to San Antonio the day after the hijackings. In their possession, investigators say box cutters, hair dye, thousands in cash, and unused airline tickets. Sources now confirm the 2 have been flown to New York for further questioning. And the FBI would also like to know more about this man, 33-year-old Zacharias Moussaoui.
As you can see, some familiarity with the official version starts to surface with the detainment of Zacharias Moussaoui, but there will be much more to explain and correct about Ayub Khan and Mohammed Osmoth ahead.
Dozens of people have been temporarily detained for questioning. This is the largest investigation ever mounted by the FBI, drawing in police from every state. At New York's JFK Airport, a man described as a material witness was detained after giving a false identity. Another 2 were taken off a train in Fort Worth, Texas, allegedly carrying knives and a large amount of cash. And a further 23 are being held on immigration charges.
While at New York airports, anyone even remotely suspicious was yanked off of planes.
Move back. America's Most Wanted special, America Fights Back, is the last time the first 2 Middle Eastern men arrested from LaGuardia Airport are shown, but now with their faces blurred.
U.S. federal prosecutors in New York have issued a second arrest warrant in the case and expect to issue several more. 1 man was arrested earlier this week. He's described as a material witness. 25 other people have been arrested for immigration violations and are being questioned about their possible connection to the case. 2 men were arrested in Texas after a disturbance on a train.
There's been 1 arrest so far. An unidentified man detained at New York's Kennedy Airport Tuesday night is now in custody as a material witness. Meanwhile, 25 people have been taken into custody, some on alleged immigration violations. They are among 100 people that the FBI say they want to interview.